Chapter 475. Go to watch net. In the eyes of other cultivators, speaking the Chinese language, learning Chinese culture, and believing in Chinese beliefs were not difficult. However, if one wanted to change their nationality, the entire concept would change. If Chris, John, and Alba wanted to learn cultivation, they would have to change from American to Chinese. Not to mention whether they were willing or not. Even if they were willing, it would be difficult for other sects to use this as an excuse to attack Li Yundong. Watch net. 7 KOM. Du Fei secretly gave Li Yundong a thumbs up and praised him in his heart. I really didn't misjudge Li Yundong. Not to mention his cultivation at such a young age, he is also very quick-witted. In the blink of an eye, he was able to solve such a big problem. Amazing, good means. Wei Qing also looked at Li Yunyang with admiration as she translated. After she finished, Hardadef was stunned on the spot, as if he had lost his soul. John, who thought of things very simply, always thought that as long as he came, Li Yundong would accept him as an apprentice, just like in the movies, and then he would start a magical journey. But what he didn't expect was that Li Yundong knew the most important national treasure of the Chinese nation. It couldn't be passed on easily. Hardadef's face was ashen, and he stood there as if he had lost his parents. Chris also stared at Li Yundong in disbelief. She said in surprise, "You actually want us to change our nationality? You're making things difficult for me. You're going too far." Li Yundong shook his head calmly. "Chris, you're the one who's forcing me. You won't be able to understand what you're trying to learn. It's definitely not the kind of kung fu that you see in movies and TV shows. This is a technique that can surpass life and death, surpass the heavens and earth. If you can't do the 4 points, I will never accept you as my disciples." Chris looked at his determined expression and couldn't help shouting, "Then why didn't you make it clear at the beginning?" Li Yundong sighed and said with a wry smile, "I thought that you would forget all this when you went back. It's my fault. I apologize to you. I never thought that you would come back." Chris felt as if she had been humiliated. Her pretty face flushed, and her eyeballs kept rolling in her eye sockets. Seeing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He shook his head and said to Su Chan, who was very obedient and silent, "Let's go." The little foxes glanced at Chris and the others, taking pleasure in their misfortune, and then walked past them. Zhou Qin glanced at Chris. She felt some sympathy for this girl who had traveled thousands of miles to China. She felt that this girl's stubbornness and persistence were somewhat similar to her own. She deliberately fell last and then said to Chris, "We Chinese have a saying that good things are strewn with setbacks. If you have seen the journey to the west, you should know that Sun Wukong and Tang Sanzang went to the west to seek Buddhist scriptures. They went through 81 difficulties along the way and finally obtained the true scriptures. If you really want to learn cultivation, then don't be afraid of these difficulties. Take these difficulties as your tests. Only real tests and tempering will make you stand out." After that, she sighed softly and followed Li Yundong closely onto the cruise ship. Although Chris had heard Zhou Qin's words, how could she listen to them at this time? John, who was beside her, also lowered his head dejectedly and kept muttering, "What should I do? What should I do? Master won't accept me." However, after hearing Wei Qing's translation, Alba shouted angrily, Damn it, damn it. How can there be such an ungentlemanly man? Are all Chinese men so chauvinistic? This is male chauvinism, this is abominable dictatorship and totalitarianism. There is no reason in the world to force people to change their nationality before accepting them as disciples." After Alba cursed for a while, she suddenly said angrily to Chris, "Chris, we came to China after suffering untold hardships. We can't come here in vain. Humph, if he doesn't accept you as his disciples, then I will ruin this stupid Taoist assembly." John was shocked and said, "Alba, you can't do anything stupid." Alba said angrily, "Bullsh*t, what stupid thing? This is the stupidest thing you've ever done. You came to China from the United States like a fool to be taught a lesson. For God's sake, is there anything more stupid than this? John said angrily, sh*t, the stupidest thing in the world is that you were f*king dumped by Jack and then f*king followed us here. Alba was so ashamed that her eyebrows were raised. What did you say? Chris finally couldn't stand it anymore. She said angrily, shut up, both of you. Alba and John turned to look at Chris at the same time. The two of them frowned and glared at her angrily. Chris glared at them without showing any weakness, then pointed to the side of the road and said, do you want these Chinese people to laugh at us? Alba said sarcastically, these Chinese people? Those Chinese people, you can become Chinese for this stupid cultivation. Chris said angrily, Alba, shut up. Alba snorted and turned her head away. She looked at the people on the side of the road who were pointing at them and suddenly had an idea. She laughed and said, I know how to make trouble. As she said this, she pointed at Chris and said, don't f*king stop me, or I'll fall out with you. Chris looked at Alba's determined expression, pressed her forehead, and shook her head. Do whatever you want. Let me be quiet for a while. Alba sneered. She ran to the roadside phone booth, put in a 1 yuan coin, and dialed a number. When she put down the phone and walked over proudly, Chris couldn't help but ask, Alba, why are you calling? Alba couldn't help laughing. I called the police. Chris and John looked at Alba with their mouths agape and stammered, what? You called the police? Alba laughed and said, they won't let us attend the Taoist assembly, so I won't let them hold it. I just called the police station and told them that someone was holding an illegal party. Chris was shocked and said, Alba, are you crazy? Don't you know that it's illegal to lie to the police? Do you want to be arrested and sent back to China? Alba laughed and said, okay, send me back. It'll save me a plane ticket. John said sarcastically, come on, they'll send you to a remote place to dig sand. When you earn enough money for the plane ticket, they'll send you back. Given the cheap labor commission in China, I think you won't be able to earn back the money for the plane ticket until you're old. The American media had always demonized the totalitarian rule of China. When Alba heard what John said, she was also a little afraid. She stared blankly and said, no way. Is it really that scary? John added fuel to the fire. That's right. Think about it. A young, beautiful, sexy, and adorable girl like you is stranded in a construction site in the wilderness. There are only barbaric and vulgar men there. What kind of terrifying and inhuman torture would you have to endure every night? Alba was so frightened by John that her face changed a little. She stammered, John, don't scare me. Chris saw that Alba was really frightened. She glared at John and then comforted him, Alba, did you use English on the phone just now? Alba nodded, then opened her mouth and pointed to her tongue. Of course. Do I look like someone who can tie a bow knot with their tongue? John laughed and said, you idiot. Can they understand you if you call the police in English? Alba patted her chest and felt a little relieved. It's better if they don't understand. Chris suddenly thought of something and said, it seems that China's current alarm system has a recording device. Alba became nervous again. What? Then let's hurry up and run. Chris looked at Alba with a mixture of anger and amusement. She thought for a moment and said, let's wait in a place farther away and see what happens. John and Alba looked at each other and nodded together. Then, they quickly fled the scene with Chris like thieves. Just as Chris and the others were looking at the white yacht from afar anxiously, Li Yundong and the others had already arrived at the yacht. Before boarding the yacht from the dock, Li Yundong saw a yellow-faced, yellow-bearded man standing at the entrance of the yacht's deck. The man saw Li Yundong and the many beautiful women behind him. He was slightly stunned and frowned secretly. He said in a deep voice, please report your sect and hand over the golden invitation. This is Sun Beidian, the Shibwa of Wan Jinyuan, the leader of the Gazao sect. He is a great cultivator who lives in seclusion. His cultivation and kung fu are definitely not inferior to that of Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school. I didn't expect him to come out today and even act as a greeter. It seems that the Gezhou sect really attaches great importance to the Taoist assembly today. Li Yundong nodded slightly. He turned to Du Fei, who had come in with him, and said with a smile, "Jinren Du, please go first." Du Fei was slightly stunned, but he didn't think too much about it. He cupped his hands and smiled at Li Yundong, then quickly walked to the front and took the initiative to hand over a golden invitation. Sun Beidian opened it and glanced at it with a smile on his face. He said, "It turns out to be Jinren Du of the Chuanjin Dragon sect. Please come in." After that, he took a deep breath and said in a clear voice, "Jinren Du and Jinren Wei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect have arrived." At this time, there were more than a dozen cultivators from different sects on the yacht. There were about 200 or 300 of them. They were chatting when they heard a shout outside. They immediately quieted down and looked at the door one after another. As the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, although Du Fei's cultivation and kung fu were not the best, he was a forthright person and held great economic power in the sect, so his words carried a lot of weight in the cultivation world. As soon as he arrived, everyone looked at him. Some of them had never seen Du Fei before, so they wanted to see what this world-famous, jade-faced golden monkey looked like. They looked over and saw that the first person to come in was a tall girl with a pleasant appearance. When the girl saw everyone looking at her, she blushed and turned her eyes. Then, she saw Yu Sheng and the others of the Chuanjin Dragon sect and quickly ran over to them and sat down. Only Du Fei entered the door alone. He was not in a hurry to take his seat. He just smiled and cupped his hands at everyone. Everyone saw that Du Fei was still neither humble nor arrogant on such an occasion. He smiled calmly and had an extraordinary bearing. They all secretly praised him in their hearts. He is indeed the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjin Dragon sect. His bearing is really amazing. After seeing Du Fei enter, Li Yundong smiled at Zi Yuan and said, "You go first." Zi Yuan asked curiously, "Do you want to go in last?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I want to wait for them to get tired of looking at me. When I go in again, they won't look at me." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Now that your cultivation is so powerful, are you still afraid of being looked at?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "The more powerful a cultivator is, the more afraid they are of being looked at. Otherwise, why would those masters hide? I have to keep a low profile." Ruan Hongling giggled and said, "It's useless. A man like you will attract attention wherever he goes." Li Yundong laughed. Zi Yuan shook her head with a smile and handed over the golden invitation with Ruan Hongling. Sun Beidian opened the golden invitation and looked at it. He looked at Zi Yuan with some emotion and said, "It turns out that you are Wang Yuanshan's disciple. You are indeed extraordinary. Please come in." After that, he announced in a loud voice, "Jinren Zi Yuan and Jinren Ruan Hongling, the disciples of Wang Yuanshan of the Zhengyi school of the Lingang sect, have arrived." At this time, when the cultivators on the yacht heard this, they all whispered to each other, "Could it be that beautiful Zi Yuan? Could it be that Zi Yuan, who is known as the top master of the younger generation? Look, we have to take a good look at her." Many of the cultivators in these sects cultivated in seclusion. They would only enter the world once at the Taoist assembly. Therefore, they had only heard of Zi Yuan's name and had never seen her appearance. At this time, some curious young men all stood up to see Zi Yuan's appearance. At this time, they saw Ruan Hongling enter the yacht first. This woman was extremely beautiful, and her eyes were bright and black, which left a deep impression on them. They couldn't help but nod and say, "Yes, she is indeed beautiful." But then a woman in a white dress walked in from behind. This woman seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist, giving people a feeling of smoke shrouding the cold water and the moon shrouding the sand. They only felt a wave of beauty that could topple a city rush towards them, causing everyone present to hold their breath for a moment, not daring to breathe too loudly. At this time, everyone's mind was filled with the same thought, "Ah, this must be Zi Yuan." How could there be another woman in the world who was so ethereal? Zi Yuan had long been accustomed to being stared at like this. She walked to a corner with a cold expression. After sitting down with Ruan Hongling, there were still many young cultivators who couldn't control themselves and craned their necks to look at her. After seeing Zi Yuan go in, Li Yundong, who was outside, also calmed down a little. He turned to Su Chan and the little foxes and said, "Don't make any trouble later, or I won't take you out again." Su Chan blinked, covered her mouth with both hands, and said in a muffled voice, "Don't worry, I won't say anything even if you beat me to death." The little foxes all followed suit and said, "I won't say anything even if you beat me to death." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He walked up to Sun Beidian and handed over his golden invitation. Sun Beidian seemed to be very uncomfortable with Li Yundong's behavior of being surrounded by beautiful women. He sneered secretly and casually took the golden invitation and flipped through it. When he saw it, he was suddenly stunned. He suddenly raised his head and asked, "Are you Li Yundong, the leader of the Fox Zen school?" Li Yundong nodded with a smile and said, "Yes." Sun Baitian's eyes widened. He looked Li Yundong up and down carefully for a while, then asked, "Are you the Li Yundong who made a scene in the ancestral court of Mount Gazao?" Good news doesn't go out, but bad news spreads thousands of miles. Li Yundong smiled helplessly and said, "It seems to be me." Sun Beidian laughed angrily. "I was afraid that you wouldn't come today, but I didn't expect you to come." "Good, good, good." After that, Sun Beidian announced loudly, "The leader of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong, has arrived with his disciples." At this time, most of the people on the yacht were still immersed in Zi Yuan's amazing beauty. At this time, when they heard Sun Baitian's shout, they were all shocked at the same time. Zhang Ling, in particular, opened her eyes and stood up abruptly. Her eyes were shining brightly as she looked at the door. As soon as she stood up, Zhou Ping and the other disciples of the Zhengyi school also stood up and looked at the door with unfriendly eyes. Zhang Cuni, Yu Sheng, Zhang Tianhe, and Wang Lingfei, the young handsome men who had had conflicts with Li Yundong, all stood up at the same time and stared at the door. Although some of the cultivators had never seen this young cultivator who had been in the limelight recently, they had more or less heard of Li Yundong stopping the heroes on Mount Tianlong and snatching food from the tiger's mouth on Mount Gazao. They were secretly surprised and curious. They all stood up at the same time and thought, "What's so great about this Li Yundong? Could it be that he has 3 heads and 6 arms?" For a moment, everyone on the yacht stood up at the same time and looked at the door, waiting to see what Li Yundong, who was famous all over the world, looked like. Chapter 476. Go to watch net. When everyone stretched their necks and looked up, a slim and graceful woman suddenly came in front of them. This woman was extremely beautiful, and there was a cold and stern temperament between her eyebrows. After she came in, she glanced at the crowd lightly. Although she looked quite unfamiliar, she did not have stage fright under everyone's gaze. Instead, her bright eyes made some cultivators subconsciously avoid looking at her. Go to watch net. When everyone saw this, they were secretly surprised and wondered, which sect is this female cultivator from? How can she have such a strong aura? What's more, her appearance and temperament are so outstanding. Has there been another female cultivator in the cultivation world who can stand shoulder to shoulder with Zi Yuan? Ding Nan, who had been standing next to Jing Yuan, saw this and was even more shocked. She gritted her teeth and thought to herself, "Damn it, I thought I was cultivating very fast, but I didn't expect Zhou Qin to be even faster. Damn it. Why am I always one step behind her? Am I not as good as her? Impossible, this is absolutely impossible." Zheng Yuan, who was standing to one side, stared at Zhou Qin with a trace of shock on his face. He thought to himself, how is this possible? She has actually reached the Zhuji phase. How could her cultivation speed be so fast? Damn it, Li Yundong must have fed her the Rinyuan Jindan. While the two of them were thinking about it, they suddenly saw a girl with rolling eyes behind Zhou Qin. The girl's eyebrows were lively, her eyes were bright, and her appearance was beautiful and charming. There was a hint of immaturity in her beauty, but when she rolled her eyes, there was a hidden charm, which made people involuntarily think, when this girl grows up in the future, she will definitely be a peerless beauty who can turn all living things upside down. The girl was Su Chan. At a glance, she saw everyone's eyes fixed on her. Many male cultivators showed unconcealable greed and possessiveness. She was shocked and shrank back, hiding behind Li Yundong. It was as if she could only feel safe behind this boy. Li Yundong smiled and patted the little girl's head, then walked in by himself. As soon as he entered the yacht, he immediately felt everyone's sharp gazes directed at him. It was like a battlefield filled with blades, spears, swords, and halberds. The surroundings were filled with murderous intent and killing intent. If it had been in the past, Li Yundong's qi might have been stimulated and burst out like a bomb exploding. But now, his qi had changed from being released to being restrained, and his character was not as quick as before. If Li Yundong had been a long river of New River in the past, he would roar majestically and set off huge waves to smash any obstacles in his way. But now, Li Yundong was a towering mountain. No matter how strong he was like a cool breeze caressing the mountain. In the face of this aggressive and suffocating gaze, Li Yundong smiled slightly and cupped his hands to the crowd. Then, he took Su Chan and the little foxes and walked unhurriedly to where Zi Yuan was sitting. The cultivators on the ship saw that Li Yundong's bearing was calm and steady. He was not as sharp as the rumors said, nor did he have that aggressive aura. They couldn't help but think, is Li Yundong afraid? Only a few cultivators, such as Zhang Ling and Zhang Tianhe, vaguely felt that Li Yundong's aura had changed, but they couldn't tell what was different. Zhang Cuni of the Qinqing sect watched Li Yundong swagger through the market with a group of fox spirits, especially when he sat down next to Zi Yuan in front of everyone. He couldn't help snorting coldly. What an anomaly. In this day and age, there are actually bullies running rampant and evildoers dancing wildly. He. Zhang Tianhe, who was not far away from him, heard his words and glanced at Zhang Cuni. Then, he snorted coldly and looked at Li Yundong unkindly. Especially when he saw Li Yundong and Zi Yuan talking intimately, he couldn't help but show jealousy in his eyes. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails pierced into his flesh, but he didn't even notice it. Most of the cultivators next to Zhang Tianhe were paying attention to Li Yundong and this group of incomparably dazzling fox spirits. Only Zhou Ping looked at Zhang Tianhe affectionately, but when she saw Zhang Tianhe staring at Zi Yuan, she couldn't help but feel a pain in her heart. She gritted her teeth and said to herself, if it weren't for that little B*TCH Zi Yuan, Shitty would have been with me. It's all that B*TCH's fault. Not only did she take away my Shitty's heart, but she also sat with Li Yundong in public. This is betrayal. Does this woman have any shame? Humph, I must make her lose her reputation. Although Li Yundong's cultivation was excellent, he was not an immortal after all. How could he know the thoughts of everyone in the various sects? After he entered the yacht, he secretly looked around. In his eyes, the yacht was decorated with about 20 or 30 square tables. Beside each table were 10 square stools, and there was an incense burner on the table. In the middle of these dozens of square tables was a large square table. This square table was against the wall, and on it was placed the statue of Laozi, the founder of Taoism. On both sides of Laozi were the statues of Yuanshi Tianzuan and Lingbao Tianzuan. Next to the heavenly primogenitor were the statues of the founders of the Taoist assembly, Great Jinren Luo Gongyuan and Yi Fashion. On the other side, next to the heavenly primogenitor Lingbao were the statues of the Jade Emperor and the Queen Mother. On the wall behind these statues was a huge yin-yang 8 trigrams. On both sides of the 8 trigrams were a pair of couplets. The upper couplet on the right was, Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. The lower couplet on the left was, Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature. In the middle of the couplet were 4 big words, The Great Way is invisible. When Li Yundong saw this couplet, he couldn't help cheering in his heart. He turned to Zhou Qin and said, "Zhou Qin, look at this couplet. It talks about the mystery of our cultivation. You have to keep it in mind." Zhou Qin nodded in agreement. She pointed to the statues in front of the couplet in confusion and asked, "I know some of these statues, but I don't know some of them. Master, can you explain them to me?" After Li Yundong came out of the 3,000 worldlets, he was no longer an ignorant person. At this time, he had read the classics of Buddhism and Taoism. He smiled and explained them one by one. Su Chan and the little foxes beside him also pricked up their ears and listened with great interest. Just as they were whispering to each other, they suddenly heard a crisp, ding sound. This crisp sound was like the ringing of a bell. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound. Li Yundong and the others also stopped talking and looked up. Li Yundong saw a cultivator who was about 1.7 meters tall, with deep eyes and a high nose, and a goatee on his chin, coming out from the back of the cabin. He was the host of this Taoist assembly, Wan Zhenyuan, the leader of the Gazao sect. Wan Zhenyuan was wearing a Taoist robe with long sleeves fluttering in the wind, looking quite elegant. His bright eyes swept across the crowd quickly. When he glanced at Li Yundong's table, his eyes paused for a moment, but he quickly looked away. Wan Zhenyuan walked to the square table at the head of the table, cupped his hands to the crowd, and said, "Fellow Taoists, thank you for giving me face and coming to the Taoist assembly. I'm deeply honored. This Taoist assembly will be..." Before he could finish his words, he heard someone shouting impatiently, "Master Wan, hurry up and take out the rewards of this Taoist assembly. We're here to get treasures, not to listen to you." As soon as this person said this, Li Yundong smiled knowingly, because the person who spoke was none other than Dang Cheng of the Penglai sect, whom he had met several times. Dang Cheng was sitting at a table with one foot on a stool next to him. He was munching on melon seeds as he yelled. His actions were very conspicuous in the crowd, causing the people around him to roll their eyes at him. Wan Zhenyuan was choked by Dang Cheng's words and suddenly couldn't continue. He was angry in his heart and glanced at Dang Cheng, but he still smiled and said, "It turns out to be a fellow Taoist from the Penglai sect. Nice to meet you." Dang Cheng laughed and said, "Master Wan, you must want to slap me to death. Last time on Mount Gazao, you wanted it even more this time. Don't be so hypocritical. Hurry up and get to the point." Although Dang Cheng was as shameless as a ruffian, his words were crude and his reasoning was not crude. Some cultivators in the cabin couldn't help but laugh and jeer. "Well said, Master Wan, hurry up and get to the point. We're all itching to get impatient." "That's right. We've cultivated for more than 10 years. Did we come here to listen to your nonsense? Hurry up and fight." "Yes, Master Wan, what's the treasure this time? Take it out and let us have an eye-opener." Wan Zhenyuan's face was a little ugly. He forced a smile and was about to speak when he suddenly saw Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school slap the table and stand up. She said sternly, "Nonsense, do you think this is a vegetable market? You're still cultivators. If I didn't know better, I would think that you were all a group of hooligans. Do you think you're a gang or a club?" Zhang Ling was a famous cultivator in Jianghu, and she was also the sister of Taoist Zhang of the Jingyi school. Her bearing and prestige were extremely high. As soon as she shouted, the hall suddenly became silent, and no cultivator dared to speak again. Wan Zhenyuan glanced at Zhang Ling with an unnatural expression and thought to himself, "The power of the Jingyi school is really great. Does Zhang Ling, this fierce dragon, want to overturn the rivers and seas and steal my leadership at the Taoist assembly?" While he was thinking this, Zhang Ling said to him, "Master Wan, the Taoist assembly held once every 4 years is extraordinary. This is not only a good opportunity for our Taoist sects to recover their vitality and return to the orthodox tradition, but also a good opportunity for our Taoist sects to let go of their past grievances and work together." When Wan Zhenyuan heard this, he suddenly became vigilant. He thought to himself, return to the orthodox tradition? Who is the orthodox tradition? Let go of their past grievances and work together? Hee, the Jingyi school can't help it anymore. They're going to show their true colors. They're going to unify the Taoist sects. Thinking of this, Wang Jinyuan couldn't help interrupting Zhang Ling. He asked with a fake smile, then dare I ask Jinren Zhang Ling, what is the orthodox tradition? Zhang Ling snorted and waved her hand. Then, all the people in Taoist robes of the Jingyi school stood up. Zhang Ling pointed at the Taoist robes they were wearing and said, this is the orthodox tradition. This sentence was meaningful. It not only satirized others for forgetting their ancestors and not even wearing the clothes that Taoist priests should wear at the Taoist assembly, but also hinted that the Jingyi school was the orthodox tradition in the world. Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, is wearing Taoist robes the orthodox tradition? He waved his hand and shouted, come out, all of you. Then, a group of Taoist priests in Taoist robes came out of the cabin and looked at the people of the Jingyi school with unfriendly eyes. Zhang Ling saw that these Taoist priests had blocked the yacht and surrounded it. She sneered and said, what's the matter? Master Wan, are you going to catch us all in one fell swoop? Although everyone could hear the intention of sowing discord in her words, they still couldn't help being frightened and vigilant. They looked at the other Taoist priests of the Gazao sect with hostility. Seeing that the situation was about to break out, they suddenly heard a shameless voice say leisurely, if wearing a Taoist robe is the orthodox tradition, then I am also the orthodox tradition. Everyone looked over and saw Dang Cheng speaking with a cheeky smile on his face. Someone next to him sneered and said, you're wearing a vest. How is that a Taoist robe? Dang Cheng jumped up with a laugh and said carelessly, brothers of the Tao, look carefully. After saying that, he quickly took off his clothes. In a short while, he was completely naked. The male cultivators in the cabin all laughed in horror, while the female cultivators all blushed and spat, then turned their faces away. Wang Jinyuan shouted angrily, Dang Cheng, what are you doing? Dang Cheng laughed. He picked up a cup of tea with one hand and said, I'll wear a Taoist robe for you to see. As he said this, he poured the tea on his body and quickly smeared it everywhere with his hands. Everyone saw that there seemed to be a mass of ink hidden in Dang Cheng's palm. Wherever he smeared it, it would be dark. After a while, Dang Cheng had painted a close-fitting Taoist robe on his body as if he was playing with body painting. After Dang Cheng finished, he clapped his hands and laughed. How about it? Brothers of the Tao, is this a Taoist robe? Everyone saw that Dang Cheng was wearing a colorful Taoist robe on his chest, but his white body was on his back. They were surprised and laughed at the same time. Dang Cheng, what kind of Taoist robe is this? Where's your butt? Why isn't your butt covered by the Taoist robe? Dang Cheng, what's that thing in front of you? Is it a dust handle? Dang Cheng said without any shame, what is a Taoist robe? Can it cover your shame? If it could, how could you quarrel like this at the Taoist assembly, which is held once every 4 years? His words had a double meaning, and they immediately attracted the cheers of all the cultivators from the other sections. For a moment, the tense atmosphere was greatly reduced. Li Yundong also nodded with a smile and said to Zi Yuan, this Dang Cheng is a ruffian, but he's not a ruffian. Zi Yuan's cheeks turned slightly red. She whispered, but there's no need to be like this, naked, right? Li Yundong laughed and said, I came naked when I was born and left naked when I died. That's a man of character. Zi Yuan glared at Li Yundong angrily. Then why don't you go and be a man of character? Li Yundong chuckled and didn't answer. At this time, Wang Jinyuan snorted coldly and waved his hand again. The Taoists disappeared in an instant, as if they had never appeared. He glanced at Dang Cheng and then said to Zhang Ling with a sneer, I'm just telling you, Jinren Zhang Ling, that you are not the only one who remembers the orthodox Taoism. Zhang Ling also sneered and said, I also want to remind all the cultivators not to forget their roots at the Taoist assembly. As she said this, she also sat down with the cultivators of her own sect. The people of the other sects saw the secret battle between Wang Jinyuan and Zhang Ling, but in fact, It represented the battle between the number 1 sect of the Niden sect and the number 1 sect of the external alchemy. They all frowned at the same time and thought, has the battle in the cultivation world become so intense? How could he not be able to restrain himself from fighting after just a few words at the Taoist assembly? Su Chan tugged at Li Yundong's sleeve curiously and asked in a low voice, Yundong, why do I feel like they are going to fight? Li Yundong chuckled and said in a low voice, it's okay. Let's just watch them fight. While the two of them were talking in low voices, they heard Wang Jinyuan say, since no one wants to listen to nonsense, I won't be long-winded. Let's get someone to bring out the prize of this Taoist assembly. After that, he shouted, bring out the powerful magical weapon. Su Chan and Li Yundong stopped talking at the same time and looked at the field at the same time. They both wanted to see what the prize of the Taoist assembly, which was held once every 4 years, would be. Vote recommendation previous page next page error report if you like it. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 477. Go to watch net. Wang Jinyuan shouted, and soon 2 beautiful female Taoist priests in Taoist robes came out from the back of the cabin. The 2 female Taoist priests came out holding a large brush that was 2 meters long and nearly half a meter thick. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Everyone saw the huge brush at first glance, and some people who didn't know what it was laughed. Master Wan, what is this? Deng Cheng, who had put his clothes back on the boat, shouted, Master Wan, why are you fooling us with such a thing? Isn't this a large mop? Everyone burst out laughing. Wang Jinyuan really hated Deng Cheng in his heart. He gritted his teeth and was angry in his heart, but his face was full of smiles. He said with a smile, Jinren Deng Cheng is so funny. Fellow Taoists, do you know what kind of powerful magical weapon this is? There were also cultivators who knew what it was. They carefully looked at the huge brush, and Zi Yuan vaguely saw some clues. She whispered to Li Yundong, it seems to be an immortal pen. An immortal pen? Li Yundong looked at it carefully and nodded slightly. It does look a little like it. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, straightened up and said in a low voice, is it the magical item used by Wuxia during the 3 Kingdoms period, the immortal pen? Zi Yuan looked at her with a smile. It seems so. Su Chan's eyes widened and she said in surprise, is it an immortal pen that can write talismans and divine thunder of the 5 elements at will? Li Yundong smiled and pinched her nose. It seems to be this immortal pen. Su Chan became excited all of a sudden. Oh, Yundong, this is a great treasure. You have to get it. You have to get it. Although Zhou Qin had succeeded in the Zhuji phase, her understanding of these powerful magical weapons was almost like a blank piece of paper. She couldn't help asking Su Chan, what kind of treasure is this? Why are you so excited? Su Chan grabbed Zhou Qin's arm and asked with her eyes wide open, Sister Zhou Qin, do you know who Guhong is who wrote Hugging Pussy? Zhou Qin nodded in confusion. Yes. He is a cultivator who wrote a book to tell the world that gods can't cultivate, but immortals can. Do you know who Guhong's master is? Su Chan asked again. Zhou Qin had also read a lot of Taoist classics, so this knowledge was not difficult for her. She became more and more confused. Yes, Zheng Yin. Do you know who Zheng Yin's Shifu is? Su Chan asked. Zhou Qin laughed and said, of course I know. It's the Tai Chi immortal Guxian, Guhong's grandfather. Su Chan, are you testing me? Su Chan's eyes widened. Do you know who Guxian's master is? Zhou Qin was stunned for a moment and said, is it Wuxia? Su Chan shook Zhou Qin's arm excitedly. Yes, Wuxia is the master of the Taiji immortal. He was also the founder of the Pill Cauldron sect. This immortal pen was his personal Dharma treasure. Think about it, Fahai's personal magic tool was already so powerful. Isn't this immortal pen even more powerful? Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, also nodded and added, yes, it said that the immortal pen can write talismans at will. Even if you write the word thunder, it can attract thunder from the sky. Seeing that Zhou Qin still didn't understand the mystery of the immortal pen, Li Yunyang explained with a smile, Zhou Qin, you are now full of Zhenqi, which is equivalent to a great master with great internal strength in Wuxia novels. However, you don't know martial arts moves, so if you fight with others, you may not be able to defeat those cultivators whose Zhenqi is not as good as yours but who know a lot of martial arts moves. Especially those cultivators who use talismans. Because they use talismans when they cast magic, they have the three characteristics of speed, accuracy, and ruthlessness. Su Chan once gave me a heavenly thunder talisman. When I used it to cast spells, it only took a few seconds. I could do whatever I wanted, and I didn't have to worry about being hit at all. But if I didn't use the talisman and used my own Zhenqi, it would take at least a minute, or even more. The most important thing was that I had to worry about being hit. Hearing this, Zhou Qin suddenly understood. Ah, I understand. Are these talismans very rare at ordinary times? Zi Yuan took over the conversation, nodded, and said, very rare. It's not an exaggeration to say that they're worth a lot of gold. Only then did Zhou Qin look at the immortal pen in horror. So, if anyone has the immortal pen, doesn't it mean that they have unlimited talismans to use? Zi Yuan laughed and said, that's not true. If you want to use a magical item like the immortal pen, it will consume a lot of essence qi to write a talisman. I guess if I write 2 talismans like this, all my Zhenqi will be used up. Zhou Qin frowned and said, then what's the use of this divine item? Su Chan interrupted with a smile, Sister Zhou Qin, you're so stupid. You can write it for self-defense. Moreover, talismans weren't something that just anyone could write. The process of learning talismans is very complicated and difficult to understand. My master can only write heavenly thunder talismans, and I can only write invisibility talismans. I can't write anything else. Zhou Qin smiled and said, I see. I was ignorant. As she said this, she turned her head to look at Li Yundong and urged, Master, why don't you snatch this immortal pen? It'll be like adding wings to a tiger if you hold it in your hand. Li Yundong had originally thought that Wang Jinyuan would take out the Diyuan Jindan or the Medicine King tripod, but he hadn't expected that he would take out the immortal pen. Although it was also an extremely powerful magical weapon, Li Yundong was a little uninterested in it. Li Yundong smiled and said, I have enough powerful magical weapons. Why do I need so many? Besides, powerful magical weapons are the same as magic. They are valuable in quality, not quantity. I haven't even mastered the burning thumb pot yet, and now I have an immortal pen. Aren't you afraid of making others jealous? Zi Yuan opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she held them back and didn't say anything. Su Chan was unwilling to give up and said, Yundong, I remember that you have visualized the Dharmakaya of the immovable Wisdom King. You have 6 magical items in your hands, and one of them is this immortal pen. It means that it will be your powerful magical weapon sooner or later. Li Yundong chuckled and said, since it will be mine sooner or later, I'm not in a hurry. Don't you see so many people here looking at this immortal pen eagerly? Since so many people want to snatch it, I won't join in the fun. If it's really mine, even if I don't want to snatch it, it will still fall into my hands. Ruan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, snorted and muttered in a low voice, you have a powerful magical weapon to use, but Shiji Zi Yuan. Before she could finish speaking, Zi Yuan stepped on her foot under the table and glared at her. She didn't continue speaking. Hearing this, Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan in confusion and asked, Zi Yuan, what's wrong with you? Zi Yuan smiled. Just as she was about to speak, someone in the field suddenly made a noise and said loudly, Master Wan, this is the immortal pen. This powerful magical weapon hasn't appeared in the world for more than 1,000 years. How did you get it? Wang Jinyuan looked proud. He smiled and stroked his goatee, saying, yes, this is the immortal pen used by Taoists Wuxia. If you don't believe me, you can have a look. After that, he pressed his hand on the huge brush, and it immediately shrank automatically. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk into a small brush that was only 20 centimeters long. Wang Jinyuan picked up the immortal pen, and the beautiful female Taoist of the Gazao sect next to him obediently held a cup of tea with both hands. Wang Jinyuan picked up the pen and dipped it in the tea. Then, he wrote the word, flower, in the air. The word floated in the air without dispersing. After a while, it quickly emitted a dazzling colorful brilliance, and then quickly turned into blooming flowers in front of everyone. Wang Jinyuan laughed and flicked his sleeve, shattering the flowers hanging in the air. For a moment, petals fell in the cabin, and the fragrance of flowers filled the air. Zhou Qin was stunned. She said in surprise, you can make flowers appear by writing the word, flower, ? Su Chan also looked at the immortal pen with greed and envy and said, what about the word, money, ? He couldn't help laughing. He snapped his fingers and flicked Su Chan's forehead. Greedy girl, you only know how to make money. Ziyuan also couldn't help laughing and said, flowers are the fruits of wood. The immortal pen can only write about the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, as well as wind, thunder, and lightning, and turn them into real things. If you write the word, money, it won't be able to make money. Su Chan couldn't help but be disappointed. She held her forehead and pouted. At this time, everyone in the cabin believed that this pen was the immortal pen. Their eyes became extremely excited, and they secretly rubbed their palms. They were just waiting for the Taoist assembly to show off their power and seize the treasure. Although Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be shocked by the prize that Wang Jinyuan had taken out. She couldn't help but ask, Master Wan, how could you be willing to take out such a treasure as a reward? Wang Jinyuan laughed heroically. For the prosperity of our Taoist culture and the prosperity of the cultivation world again, I will not hesitate to destroy the Gazao sect. His words caused everyone to cheer in unison. They all said, Master Wan is so bold. Master Wan is so broad-minded. Zhang Ling frowned and thought to herself, no, Wang Jinyuan is not such a selfless person. He has taken out such an important powerful magical weapon, so he must be planning something big. But what was he plotting? Could it be that he is trying to buy people's hearts? But the price is too high, isn't it? While Zhang Ling was thinking to herself, she saw that some cultivators in the cabin were already impatient and clamoring, don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and fight. Let's see who can take away this immortal pen. Wang Jinyuan pressed his hands together and said loudly, everyone, don't worry. Listen to me. It was unknown whether Wang Jinyuan's heroic words had aroused the respect of everyone, or whether it was because Wang Jinyuan had taken out the immortal pen that had shocked everyone. As soon as he spoke, the noisy people immediately shut their mouths. Wang Jinyuan said, everyone, we are all respected cultivators. Of course, we can't fight randomly like hooligans. Even if we want to fight, we have to come up with a rule. Immediately, a cultivator said with a smile, Master Wan, you worry too much. We will follow the rules of the previous Taoist assembly. Wang Jinyuan said, of course not. In the past, the Taoist assembly was held in the depths of the mountains. No one knew if we fought earth-shattering. But this time, we're holding the meeting in the middle of a busy city. Both sides of the moat are either residential areas, shopping malls, or entertainment venues. If we fight, the people outside will be able to hear the commotion. Do you want to turn the place upside down? The 200 or so cultivators in the cabin were dumbfounded when they heard this. Some of them said, Master Wan, if we can't fight, how can we fight? Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, so, this time, the rule is, you have to fight, and at the same time, you have to make sure that the mortals outside don't notice. What do you think? The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other. Some of them had low cultivation quotients, so they secretly retreated. Some of them, who had high cultivation quotients, said loudly, Master Wan, let's do as you say. After a while, most of the cultivators nodded in agreement. Wan Jinyuan nodded and said with a smile, well, since everyone has agreed, I wonder which Jinren will come out and show his skills first. As soon as he finished speaking, a young man in a tang suit stood up. He cupped his hands and said, Master Wan, I'll go first. Wan Jinyuan took a look and saw that the man had tiger-like eyes and a lion-like nose, and his face was awe-inspiring. Wan Jinyuan cupped his hands and said, it turns out to be Jinren Qin Yunyan of the Qingwei sect. Sorry for not recognizing you. Qin Yunyan looked around and asked, Master Wan, may I challenge you by name? Wan Jinyuan nodded and said with a smile, as long as you follow the rules, of course you can. Qin Yunyan nodded, then suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Yundong with his eyes like lightning. He pointed at him like a sword and said, Li Yundong, do you dare to accept the challenge? I sincerely apologize to all my readers. Because of some urgent personal matters, I just flew back to Shenzhen from Suzhou. That's why I was delayed yesterday and today. There is still one chapter to update tonight. I will try to make up for yesterday's lack of updates tomorrow. I apologize again. Chapter 478. Go to watch net. When Li Yundong saw that Qin Yunyan, whom he had never met before, was the first to challenge him, he was stunned and thought to himself, why are you looking for me? Zi Yuan chuckled and said, of course I'm looking for you. Who told you to be so popular now? Who doesn't want to defeat you and become the #1 master of the younger generation? Li Yundong shook his head and smiled. False reputation is harmful. He stood up, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, Jinren Qin, thank you for your high opinion of me. I, Li Yundong, should naturally accept the challenge. But before I do, can you tell me why you picked me out of so many cultivators? Qin Yunyan sneered and said, Jinren Li, do you remember that you defeated my shitty in the Battle of Mount Tianlong? Li Yundong thought for a moment and vaguely remembered that he seemed to have defeated a cultivator from the Qingwei sect. However, because the cultivator had launched a sneak attack, he had left without even saying his name. Even Li Yundong didn't know who he had defeated. Go to watch net. Li Yundong smiled and said, I seem to remember something like that. How do you want to fight, Jinren Qin? Qin Yunyan was wearing a long robe and a mandarin jacket. He shook the hem of his robe and walked over to the crowd in 2 steps. He cupped his hands to Wan Jinyuan and said, Master Wan, please make an empty table. Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, what's so difficult about that? Someone, make a table for Jinren Qin. As he spoke, 2 Taoists from the Gazao sect rushed over. One of them lifted the table, and the other lifted the legs of the table. They quickly assembled a square table for 8 people. Then, they bowed to Wan Jinyuan and quickly left. Everyone saw that the square table was about 1.5 meters in diameter and was made of high-quality mahogany. The edge of the table was carved with exquisite patterns. Qin Yunyan took 8 cups and a kettle from his table and placed them on the table. They whispered to each other and guessed how Qin Yunyan was going to fight with Li Yundong. Qin Yunyan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, Jinren Li, there are 8 cups here. I will fill them with water in a moment, and then we will each use our shintong to urge thunder with water. Let's see whose shintong is more mysterious. What do you think? When everyone heard this, they immediately whispered excitedly, this battle is interesting. I just don't know what kind of effect it will have. Some knowledgeable cultivators also nodded slightly and said, yes, the thunder spell is the most difficult spell in the world. It is extremely difficult to control the thunder in this extremely small cabin space. A little carelessness will hurt others. I just don't know if these 2 people have enough cultivation. Otherwise, they will be trapped in a cocoon of their own making. Ding Nan couldn't help whispering to Jing Yuan, Master, why did they put 4 cups here if they want to fight with the thunder method? Jing Yuan stroked his white beard and narrowed his eyes at Qin Yunyan. He said, there are several ways to attract thunder in this world. The first is to attract thunder with qi, just like on Mount Tianlong. Zhang Tianhe and Li Yunyang both used qi to attract thunder. The other method was to use talismans to attract thunder. For example, the Jinshan sect, Maoshan sect, and other sects mainly use talismans to cultivate thunder. Another method is to attract thunder with water. Because thunder originates from water, thunder magic can be triggered through water magic. This is also a way to attract thunder. Jing Yuan looked Qin Yunyan up and down and secretly nodded in praise. Qin Yunyan is young, but he is very clever. Among the cultivation sects in the world, the Qingwei sect is the most proficient in attracting thunder with water. He must have heard of Li Yundong's ability to attract thunder with qi, so he wants to use his strength to attack the enemy's weakness. Hey, what a schemer. Only then did Ding Nan understand, and she looked at Li Yundong worriedly. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to notice Qin Yunyan's thoughts. He smiled and said, why do you need to go forward? I can also fight here. His words were easy to say, but the people around him suddenly burst into an uproar, especially the cultivators of the Qingwei sect. They all glared at Li Yundong. Qin Yunyan said with an ugly expression, Zhenrenli, are you so conceited? Zhou Qin frowned and whispered to Su Chan, Su Chan, why are they so angry? Su Chan looked at Li Yunyang worriedly and whispered, although it said that water is used to attract thunder, in the final analysis, it's still using one's own jinqi to catalyze the water in front of him, and finally make the water surge into thunder. Therefore, standing closer will naturally have an advantage. Yundong is standing so far away, so his jinqi has to be transported far away. It's like a person fighting in his own territory, and Yundong has to go through a long journey to enter the battlefield. This is a big disadvantage. Zi Yuan also said in a low voice, Li Yundong, don't be arrogant. Although the Qingwei sect has declined and become a small sect, the Qingwei sect is still a small sect. However, during the Yuan and Ming dynasties, this was also an impressive sect. Dao Fa Hui Yuan was written by Zhao Yizhen of the Qingwei sect, so it should not be underestimated. In particular, the Qingwei sect mainly cultivated thunder. In the world, only the Lingxiao sect and the Zhuni school could compete with the Qingwei sect in thunder magic. Qin Yunyan is competing with you in thunder magic. You must not underestimate him. Zi Yuan spoke hurriedly and quickly, reminding Li Yundong not to underestimate his opponent 3 times in a row. Although Li Yundong didn't believe that Qin Yunyan would be his opponent, he still smiled at Zi Yuan gratefully and stepped to the table. When Qin Yunyan saw Li Yundong step forward, his expression became a little better. He snorted, picked up a teapot, and filled the 8 cups in front of the table with the etiquette of the tea ceremony. After Qin Yunyan put down the teapot, he cupped his hands and said, Zhenrenli, I've set the rules. How about you pick the teacups first? Li Yundong smiled and said, I'll pick the 4 left by you, Zhenren Chen. Seeing that Li Yundong was so arrogant, Qin Yunyan frowned secretly and sneered. He quickly touched the teacups one by one, and then pushed the 4 teacups in front of him. He said in a clear voice, I've chosen. Zhenrenli, please. Li Yundong glanced at Qin Yunyan and smiled slightly. With a wave of his sleeve, the 4 teacups were neatly arranged in front of him as if there was an invisible hand fiddling with them. Li Yundong's handsome move immediately attracted many cultivators' loud cheers. Among them, Wei Qing, a female cultivator who had a good impression of Li Yundong, cheered the loudest. Yu Xing couldn't help frowning and saying, Shiji, is it necessary to shout so loudly? What's so great about this? Wei Qing said with a smile, it's nothing great, but I just think that Zhenrenli is very handsome when he uses it. If you're not convinced, why don't you use it too? Yu Xing rolled his eyes, snorted with his nose in the air, and didn't say anything. Wei Qing was already used to her shitty's temper. She pulled Yu Xing's arm and whispered, Hey, Who do you think will win? Yu Xing said without thinking, nonsense, of course it's Li Yundong. The Qingwei sect was almost extinct during the Qing dynasty. Who is this Qin Yunyan? I've never heard of him. He's just a nobody. He's not worth mentioning. Wei Qing said with a little flagging interest, ah. There's no suspense at all? I thought that since Qin Yunyan dared to take the initiative to challenge, he must have some ability. Yu Xing snorted coldly. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Qin Yunyan make an obeisance by cupping one hand in the other before his chest and saying in a clear voice, "Fellow Taoists, please watch carefully. I will use these 4 cups of water as a medium to attract thunder and let everyone see what a small divine tribulation looks like." Yu Xing was stunned when he heard this. Before he could react, he saw Qin Yunyan suddenly let out a loud roar that sounded like a dragon's roar and a tiger's roar. This loud roar was so loud that it actually shook the 4 cups in front of him and made them jump up. Qin Yunyan waved one hand over the 4 cups and mobilized his Jinqi to forcibly suck up all the water in the cups. Everyone saw that 4 water columns suddenly appeared out of thin air in the 4 cups, and the liquid tea seemed to have turned into solid columns at this moment. Qin Yunyan's other hand chopped off the roots of the 4 water columns the moment they rose into the air. He held all 4 water columns in his 2 hands. He let out a loud shout and squeezed all the Jinqi in his body into the palms of his 2 hands. The 4 water columns were squeezed into a fist-sized water ball. As soon as the water ball was squeezed by his Jinqi, it immediately became smaller and smaller. Ripples could be faintly seen in the middle of the water ball because of the constant pressure. Everyone watched as Qin Yunyan mobilized his own Jin Yuan, abruptly squeezing the fist-sized water ball into the size of a thumb. This water ball constantly emitted a burst of mist. This mist rose up and slowly drifted in front of Qin Yunyan, forming a small majestic cloud of mist, as if it was a cloud of mist in the sky. Although everyone didn't know what Qin Yunyan was going to do next, they knew that it was impossible to compress a fist-sized water ball into a thumb-sized water droplet unless it was an extremely powerful and condensed Niden. Seeing this, Yu Xing couldn't help but look solemn. Wei Qing also widened her eyes and said in a low voice, "Shirdi, you're wrong. This is a great master." Then, with a shake of Qin Yunyan's hands, the thumb-sized water droplet suddenly jumped up on its own and drilled into the clouds floating in the air. In an instant, as soon as the water droplet entered the clouds, the color of the clouds gradually became thicker, as if dark clouds had covered the sky and become dark. There was also a rumbling sound of thunder slowly coming from the clouds. Even the sky outside the yacht became dark, as if it had suddenly turned from a sunny day to a cloudy one. Qin Yunyan pinched his fingers and recited quickly, "Give birth to heaven and earth, control water and fire, enlighten the gods, the master of all Tao." After he finished reciting the last word, he suddenly shouted, "Thunder!" Crack! Everyone felt as if their ears had been stabbed by a sharp blade. It was as if a bomb had suddenly exploded in the air. Everyone was shaken by the sudden clap of thunder in the cabin. The blood in their chests churned, and their eardrums were in extreme pain. Boom! Then, there was another deafening sound of thunder outside the cabin. Everyone was shocked and they heard it and thought to themselves, "Winter thunder?" Qin Yunyan used water to attract thunder, and he actually attracted winter thunder. Zi Yuan looked at Qin Yunyan with awe and thought to herself, "This is the long-lost secret method of Qingwei Shenlai. Not only can this person cast thunder by himself, but he can also cause heaven thunder to rumble. This thunder cultivation is really scary." Under everyone's awe-inspiring gaze, Qin Yunyan said in a clear voice, "Everyone, please look, heaven thunder is here." As soon as he finished speaking, a small bolt of lightning fell from the clouds in front of him. The lightning fell on the teacup, causing it to tremble violently. Following that, another bolt of lightning struck the cups. What was even more terrifying was that every time a bolt of lightning struck the clouds in front of Qin Yunyan, there would be a rumbling sound of thunder coming from outside the yacht, as if it was resonating with the thunder. In the blink of an eye, 81 bolts of lightning fell from the clouds in succession. The speed was so fast that it was dizzying. Everyone felt as if there was an invisible hand covering their mouths and noses, making it hard for them to breathe. They couldn't help but think, what if this lightning strikes me? After waiting for the last bolt of lightning to strike, everyone suddenly saw the dark clouds gradually dissipate, and the sky outside the yacht gradually became clear. The 4 teacups in front of Qin Yunyan were still standing in the same place, undamaged. Qin Yunyan cupped his hands to everyone in the cabin and said, "Everyone, please have a look." After that, he gently fanned the 4 teacups with his hand. A very slight breeze blew past, and the 4 teacups turned into 4 piles of powder. Then he knocked on the mahogany square table in front of him with his hand, but there was a tapping sound. The mahogany table was still as hard as before. Everyone was shocked. They knew that the 81 bolts of heaven thunder had already smashed the teacups into powder. But when so many bolts of lightning fell, all of them were concentrated on the 4 wine cups. None of them hit the mahogany table, so the teacups turned into powder, but the table was unscathed. It was one thing for Qin Yunyan to be able to summon water into lightning, but he was also able to trigger the lightning outside to increase its power and prevent it from falling. At the same time, he was able to control the lightning that he had created to accurately strike the 4 teacups. Heaven thunder was the most difficult to control, but this person could control it as accurately as a missile. What an exquisite and terrifying thunder-controlling kung fu. Most of the people in the cabin knew what he was doing. For a moment, they were all speechless and looked at Qin Yunyan with their mouths agape. There was only one thought in their minds: when did the Qingwei sect have such a powerful master? After Qin Yunyan performed his magic, he proudly cupped his hands and said, "Jinrenli, it's your turn." Chapter 479. Go to Watch Network. For a moment, the cabin of the cruise ship was extremely quiet. Everyone stared at Qin Yunyan in a daze, as if they couldn't understand who this Sun Wukong was. After all, Zhang Ling was a senior of the Zhengyi school and was very knowledgeable. She looked Qin Yunyan up and down in surprise and couldn't help asking, "Which branch of the Qingwei sect are you from? Who is Zhang Yunyan to you?" Qin Yunyan looked at Zhang Ling in surprise, then made an obeisance by cupping his hands and said, "Jinren Zhang is really amazing. You can see through my master at a glance. My original name is Qin Xing, and I am the successor of Grand Master Zhang Yunyan of the Qingwei sect." The cultivators in the hall burst into an uproar when they heard this. Zhang Tianhe couldn't help but exclaim, "Zhang Yunyan still has a successor? That's impossible." Du Fei laughed and said to Yu Xing in a low voice, "It turns out that he's from the same sect." "Good news, good news." Yu Xing snorted and didn't say anything, but there was no longer any contempt in his eyes. 7 K.O.M. Wei Qin, who was next to him, said in a low voice, "Come on, what do you mean by, from the same sect? It's been almost 1,000 years. Who would recognize him?" Zhou Qin was not far from Wei Qin. When she heard Wei Qin's words, she was puzzled, so she asked Ziyuan, "Who is Zhang Yunyan? Why did Du Fei say that Qin Yunyan is from the same sect?" Ziyuan said in a low voice with a serious expression, "Zhang Yunyan, also known as Zhang Daogui, is from Changsha, Hunan. He entered Mount Wudong from 1264 to 1294 AD and became the disciple of Jinren Wang Jinchang of the Chuanjin sect. Later, he became the disciple of Huang Shunshan, the great master of the Qingwei sect. Therefore, Zhang Yunyan is a great cultivator of both the Chuanjin sect and the Qingwei sect. That's why Du Fei said that since this Qin Yunyan is a descendant of Zhang Yunyan's bloodline, then they share the same origin." Zhou Qin nodded in understanding. She asked again, "Is Zhang Yunyan very powerful? Why is everyone so surprised when it comes to him?" Ziyuan nodded slightly and said with a serious face, "This Zhang Yunyan is known as Lei Wang. As the name implies, his thunder magic is quite powerful. At that time, he could be said to be unparalleled in the world in the Tang dynasty. Moreover, Zhang Yunyan had many disciples at that time and greatly promoted the name of the Qingwei sect. It was very likely that Qin Yunyan wanted to carry forward the Qingwei sect, so he changed his name to Qin Yunyan. From this, it can be seen that this person's ambitions are not small. After hearing this, Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with a worried face. Although she had just reached the Zhuji phase and the Jinqi in her body was vigorous, she was like a Hercules who only had strength but no moves. She had brute force but didn't know how to fight. In her opinion, Qin Yunyan's divine ability was simply a miracle. She couldn't imagine how a human could do that. Master, can he win? Zhou Qin couldn't help biting her lip and asked anxiously. Zi Yuan frowned slightly. After a long time, she did not come up with a conclusion. She took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "A strong enemy." This was a rare opponent. This person's ability to control lightning was probably on par with Zhang Yunyan. I don't know if Li Yundong can resist it. Su Chan was also so anxious that she secretly stamped her feet. She looked at Qin Yunyan with a bitter face and said in a low voice, "Why is the first person who appeared so powerful? How can I live?" Zi Yuan shook her head and laughed. There are naturally many strong people in the Taoist assembly, but Qin Yunyan has endured until now. He must have a big plan. Today, he wants to use Li Yundong to make himself famous. He really has bad intentions. Zhou Qin clenched her fists tightly and stared at the field with her eyes wide open. She suddenly hated that her cultivation was still too low and she couldn't help Li Yundong out. Zhang Cuni of the Qingqing sect also laughed in a low voice. He whispered to his companion, "It seems that I don't need to do anything. I'm afraid that Qin Yunyan will solve Li Yundong's problem. This is the first time I've heard of this person's ability to control lightning, not to mention seeing it. In terms of controlling lightning, I'm afraid that no one here can compare to him." Li Yundong was too careless and fell into Qin Yunyan's trap. He brought this upon himself. He can't live. At this time, some of the cultivators in the field looked at Li Yundong with schadenfreude, while others looked at him worriedly and were secretly worried for him. However, Li Yundong stood where he was with a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened just now. He cupped his hands to Qin Yunyan and said, "Jinren Qin, good skill. Now it's my turn." Qin Yunyan suddenly looked at Li Yundong strangely. He said with a faint smile, "Jinren Li, if you admit defeat now, it's not too late. At least you can step down with dignity." Li Yundong didn't seem to hear his words. He still had a gentle smile on his face. After he came out of the tracheocosm, the anger in his body seemed to have dissipated completely. He was no longer like the immature and reckless young man he used to be, who would easily get angry. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Jinren Chen's thunder control skill is really beautiful. I'm not talented, but I also want to make a fool of myself." After that, he waved his hand at the teacups in front of him. However, as soon as the wind from his palm touched the four teacups immediately let out a few cracking sounds and instantly broke into pieces. The tea spilled all over the table. The cultivators in the cabin suddenly burst into an uproar. Laughter and ridicule rang out incessantly. "Jinren Li, are you serious? You can't even handle these teacups?" "That's right. The teacups have been broken. How can we fight?" Zhou Qin also stood up abruptly and said in surprise, "How could the teacups be broken?" Ruan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, gritted her teeth and said, "Shameful. It must be that when Qin Yunyan touched the teacups just now, he used his hidden force to break the teacups in Li Yundong's hands. He's too shameless." Zi Yuan frowned and said angrily in a low voice, "Qin Yunyan can be considered a cultivator with great cultivation quotient. How could he do such a despicable thing? In order to win, he would do anything." Su Chan was so angry that her face turned red. She jumped up and couldn't help but curse loudly. However, when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she was stopped by Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan shook her head at her and whispered, "The outcome hasn't been decided yet. Don't worry. Let's see how Li Yundong will deal with it. Su Chan glared at Chen Yunyan fiercely and sat down angrily. Li Yundong saw the teacup break and the tea flow all over the table, but he was not surprised at all, as if he had known that such a thing would happen. He laughed, looked at Chen Yunyan meaningfully, and said, "Zhenren Chen, good trick." Chen Yunyan cupped his hands with a fake smile and said, "You're flattering me. I'm just giving you a taste of your own medicine." Li Yundong didn't bother to argue with him. He looked around and saw a skylight at the top of the cabin. He pointed at it and said to Wan Jinyuan, "Zhenren Wan, it's a little stuffy here. Can you open the window?" As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, a cultivator who didn't like him immediately said sarcastically, "Zhenren Li, are you sweating because you're afraid of guilt?" That's right. A real cultivator should have the great willpower to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapses in front of him. Aren't you too useless to sweat over such a small matter? After that, there was a burst of laughter in the cabin. Next to Zhou Ping, the little shimmy of the Jingyi school, who had been looking at Li Yundong curiously, couldn't help but say to Zhou Ping softly, "Shiji Zhou Ping, why do you think Li Yundong wants to open the skylight?" Zhou Ping sneered and said, "Who knows? Maybe he wants to find a place to escape so as not to embarrass himself." The little shimmy made a face at Zhou Ping and said, "I think he seems to have a way. Don't you see how calm he is? I feel that he is like Xixiang." Zhou Ping sneered and said, "Shimmy, only the calmness of Zhang Tianhe of the Jingyi school is the real calmness. He comes from a famous righteous sect and is also the descendant of Zhang Tianshi. His cultivation and kung fu are earth-shattering, and his every move has the bearing of a leader. This is what it means to be calm. Li Yundong is just a dabbler. Who does he think he is? How can he be compared with Xixiang?" Hearing Li Yundong's words, Wan Jinyuan also felt strange. Why didn't Li Yundong think about fighting? Why did he open the window? Could it be that he was really hot because of his guilty conscience? He didn't think too much about it. With a wave of his hand, he ordered the doorman to open the skylight at the top of the cabin. Everyone saw that the skylight was only about half a meter square. An ray of light came through from the outside and shone on the mahogany tea table in front of Li Yundong. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Just now, you saw a simulated heavenly tribulation. Now, I'll let you see a real one. How about it?" Hearing this, everyone was stunned. Before they could react, they saw Li Yundong suddenly press his hands down. With this press, everyone suddenly felt that the yacht under their feet was sinking. It was as if the yacht had suddenly become a submarine. The hull was sinking desperately. Before everyone could panic, they saw Li Yundong smiling again. His two palms facing the ground suddenly turned into palms facing the sky, and then he pushed them up forcefully. He shouted, "Water!" Boom! The surroundings seemed to be set off by raging waves. These waves covered the entire yacht, and the surroundings were instantly plunged into darkness. The surrounding water surged up as if it was going straight to the sky. In the blink of an eye, it became turbulent. Chris, John, and Alba, who were looking at the cruise ship from afar by the river, were stunned to see the originally calm moat suddenly turn into a ferocious new river. They all stared at the rolling river. John stammered, "God, what's going on?" Alba widened her eyes and stammered, "Shouldn't the moat be stagnant? How could there be such a big storm?" Chris vaguely felt that this storm might have something to do with Li Yundong and these strange people, but she still couldn't believe it. She opened her mouth wide and couldn't say anything for a moment. She just stared at the cruise ship where Li Yundong was, and there was a voice full of curiosity shouting in her heart, "For God's sake, who can tell me what's going on?" At this time, the pedestrians on both sides of the river also stopped and looked at the river in astonishment. They pointed at it one by one, and some people simply picked up the mobile phones in their hands and began to take pictures. Before long, they suddenly heard a rumbling thunder coming from the sky. They were stunned, and someone couldn't help saying, "Damn, it's thunder in winter. Only Xia Yushue is left." Someone next to him also nodded and said, yes, there are grievances among the people. While the passers-by were whispering to each other, they suddenly heard a cracking sound coming from the sky. This sound was extremely terrifying. No matter who it was, their hearts would beat violently when they heard it. They couldn't help looking up at the sky with horror and fear in their eyes. At this time, the sky was dark and full of rolling dark clouds. The dark clouds were so low that it seemed that people could touch them if they raised their hands. There were bursts of lightning rolling in the clouds, like a cage imprisoning a thunder and lightning beast. At any time, the gate would be opened and the thunder and lightning inside would be released, destroying everything in the world. Looking at the terrifying dark clouds and thunder and lightning, everyone was panicking. Suddenly, there was another loud noise coming from the sky. Crack. The sound of the explosion made everyone feel like they were hallucinating. The sky was going to collapse. At this time, all the cultivators in the cabin couldn't help standing up and looking at Li Yundong in horror. They couldn't help shouting, "Li Yundong, are you crazy? Do you want to drag us down with you? Li Yundong, are you courting death by attracting the divine tribulation? Li Yundong, do you want to die with us?" These chaotic noises kept rushing toward Li Yundong like a raging flood. But then, a deafening thunder suddenly came from the sky, making everyone's ears buzz. No one could hear what the people in front of them were saying. They could only see their mouths opening and closing, and they could only hear the buzzing sound in their ears. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't panic. Even if the sky really collapses, I can hold it up." At this time, a bolt of lightning fell from the rolling dark clouds and struck the skylight of the cruise ship. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to hear the terrible thunder. He laughed, turned his right palm up, and suddenly lifted it up into the sky. Just as Li Yundong raised one of his hands in the air, the lightning accurately hit the top of his palm and exploded with a bang. Everyone looked up and saw the dark clouds rolling in the sky outside the skylight. They were so low that they seemed to be stuck to the window. The thunder and lightning in the clouds were raging wildly, tearing the clouds apart as if the sky would collapse in the next second. Before they had time to panic, they saw the thunder and lightning striking toward the skylight like rain. Li Yundong stood where he was as if nothing had happened. He raised his hand high, and the thunder and lightning struck the top of his head. They only disappeared 3 inches in front of his hand, as if Li Yundong was really holding the sky with one hand. For a moment, everyone was shocked. They looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape and thought, "What on earth is this lunatic doing?" Chapter 480. Go to watch net. Li Yundong stood motionless in the midst of the thunder and lightning, like a towering mountain. He seemed to think that everyone was not shocked enough. He waved at the broken teacup with his other hand, grabbed all the fragments in the air, and then threw them into the skylight. As he threw it, a bolt of lightning struck down and accurately struck the center of the fragments. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Everyone felt their eyes suddenly light up, as if fireworks had been set off. For a moment, every piece of the teacup was shining and rolling in the air. However, before the shards could roll far away, another bolt of heavenly lightning struck the area around the shards of the teacup, and the shards of the teacup gathered together in the air. Everyone could see that these fragments seemed to be controlled by an invisible hand, which kept them from leaving the range of the skylight. Moreover, as the heavenly thunder continued to strike them, not only were they not directly hit by the heavenly thunder, but they were also stained with the spiritual chi of heaven and earth contained in the heavenly thunder. They looked as if they were plated with a layer of colorful glaze, dancing beautifully in the air. At this time, the cultivators in the cabin realized that Li Yundong was actually manipulating the heavenly thunder to strike the fragments of the teacup. He not only prevented the heavenly thunder from hitting them directly, but also accurately controlled them to prevent them from leaving the bombardment range. Compared to Qin Yunyan, this was 100 times more difficult. Ding Nan had been by Jing Yuan's side for a long time, but she had never thought that someone could play magic so miraculously. He was playing with heavenly thunder as if it were his pet. This was too sensational. Zheng Yuan was also dumbfounded as he looked at the rolling fragments at the skylight. For a moment, he was so shocked that he didn't even have time to think about other things. He didn't even know that his beloved disciple was looking at Li Yundong as if she was worshipping a god. Wei Qing looked at Li Yundong with a dull face. She couldn't help whispering, "Oh my god. This is impossible, isn't it? How can a person control heavenly thunder so exquisitely? This is heavenly thunder. It's not caused by magic. How did he do it?" When Yuxing heard her words, he subconsciously said with a shocked face, "No, this is not the real heavenly thunder. The real heavenly tribulation heavenly thunder cannot be controlled by anyone. This is just the heavenly thunder simulated by Li Yundong, but it's too realistic." All the cultivators on the scene were speechless at this time. They stared blankly at the boiling heavenly thunder and the rolling debris at the skylight. After an unknown period of time, when the last bolt of heavenly lightning suddenly struck down, the fragments seemed to be suddenly pinched together by an invisible hand, and became 4 perfectly intact teacups. Li Yunyang laughed and loosened his hand that was holding the sky. Suddenly, the surroundings became bright, and the rolling dark clouds in the sky slowly went away. After a while, they dissipated, and the sky became clear again. Li Yundong waved at the 4 teacups floating in the air with his other hand. The 4 teacups obediently flew to him and lined up side by side. Li Yundong placed the 4 teacups on the tea table, held one in each hand in turn, and then flicked it gently with his fingers. The teacups made a crisp sound, and colorful brilliance flowed around them. It was really colorful and dazzling. Everyone stared at the cups with their eyes wide open. They didn't understand how Li Yundong had pinched these broken teacups together again. How did he control the thunder so accurately? The cultivators present were not fools. They were all people who knew what was good and what was bad. Naturally, they knew that Chen Yunyan had broken the teacup with heavenly thunder, and Li Yundong had repaired the teacup with heavenly thunder. Zhou Qin had not been in the Tao for long, so she still couldn't see through the mysteries of these fights. She saw that everyone was looking at Li Yundong in a daze. Su Chan and Zi Yuan were both happy. She vaguely guessed that Li Yundong had won, but she still couldn't help saying to Zi Yuan, "How is it? Tell me, how is it? Did you win?" Zi Yuan's face was full of uncontrollable joy and admiration. She nodded and said, "I won." Zhou Qin immediately raised her eyebrows and asked, "How did you win?" Zi Yuan glanced at Chen Yunyan and saw that the young cultivator was standing in the same place with a pale face, looking lost. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart and think to herself, since he was born, why did he give birth to Liang? If this person hadn't fought with Li Yundong, he wouldn't have been defeated so miserably. Zi Yuan sighed softly and explained to Zhou Qin in a low voice, Chen Yunyan is actually a rare master of thunder control in the world. In terms of pure thunder control, except for Li Yundong, no one may be his opponent. Just now, he used water to attract thunder and lightning and simulated a small divine punishment in front of him. He controlled the thunder and lightning to hit the 4 cups, so the cups were smashed into powder. But Li Yundong also used water to attract thunder and lightning, and he used the mode of Dongwu City as a medium to attract thunder and lightning that was very similar to heavenly thunder. Its scale and power are many times greater than Chen Yunyan's just now. You should know that the more powerful the thunder, the more difficult it is to control its accuracy. The reason why Chen Yunyan was able to accurately hit the teacups just now was because the scale of the thunder and lightning was small. But what Li Yundong simulated just now was almost like heavenly thunder. Li Yundong was actually able to control such a powerful thunder and lightning accurately, and the degree of accuracy was far above Chen Yunyan's. What a terrifying method of thunder control. It's simply unimaginable and appalling. Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong in awe and continued, besides, it's always easier to destroy than to repair. Not to mention anything else, Chen Yunyan used heavenly thunder to smash the teacups and smash them into powder, which implied that there was no chance of survival under the pressure of heavenly thunder. But Li Yundong was able to repair the broken teacups with heavenly thunder, which implied that although the power of heavenly thunder was great, there was still a chance of survival hidden in it. This is in line with the principle of us cultivators transcending the divine punishment and cultivating the right way. Therefore, if Qin Yunyan is not blind, if he is not stupid, if he still has a trace of shame, he should immediately admit defeat. Because the battle between the two of them is on a completely different level. Hearing this, Zhou Qin let out a long breath. She chuckled and followed Zi Yuan's gaze to look at Qin Yunyan. At this time, not only were Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others looking at Qin Yunyan, but all the cultivators in the cabin were also staring at Qin Yunyan. Almost everyone silently believed that Qin Yunyan had lost, and they were just waiting for him to admit defeat. At this time, Qin Yunyan's body was trembling slightly. He had never expected that he would still lose after exhausting all his tricks. Moreover, he had lost so completely that he had no room to argue or refute. His face was pale, and his lips were trembling, as if he wanted to use all his strength to say the words, admit defeat, but when the words came to his mouth, they seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, and he couldn't say them no matter how hard he tried. While Qin Yunyan was struggling, a man suddenly jumped up from the side and said loudly, "My Shixiang should have won this round." Everyone looked over and saw that it was a cultivator from the Qingwei sect. There was an uproar and an uproar. "Do you think we are all blind and fools? If your Shixiang can win this round, I will eat all these teacups. Little boy, don't make trouble. A loss is a loss. The Qingwei sect can't afford to lose." Li Yundong looked over and saw that this man was the disciple of the Qingwei sect who had conspired with others to attack him on Mount Tianlong. He smiled slightly and cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist, you should tell me your name this time, right?" The man glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help being shocked by his bearing. His cheeks turned slightly red, and he braced himself and said, "Is the name very important?" "Let's talk about the matter at hand first." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Oh? What do you mean?" The man stiffened his neck and said, "My Shixiang made a small-scale heavenly thunder, but you made a large-scale one. This is unfair in itself, and you even want to open a skylight. This is cheating. Anyway, I'm not convinced." Everyone listened to the man's sophistry, and the last sentence gave the game away. It turns out that he really can't afford to lose. Although most of the cultivators present did not have a good impression of Li Yundong, and most of them even despised and envied the leader of the Fox Zen school, who was surrounded by beautiful women, they could not lie through their teeth and turn a good thing into a bad thing. Li Yundong saw that the man was pestering him endlessly, but he was not angry. He turned to Wang Jinyuan and said with a smile, "Master Wan, you are the host. Why don't you say something fair?" Wang Jinyuan was shocked by Li Yundong's cultivation methods. At this time, seeing that Li Yundong was quite respectful to him, he was secretly proud. He stroked his beard and said, "This battle can be said to be a fierce one. Both sides have used extremely wonderful methods of controlling thunder. It can be said that they are both good at controlling thunder. But as the saying goes, there is no first place in literature, and there is no second place in martial arts. The same is true for our cultivation of fighting methods. If I have to say who is better, I still think that Jinren Li is slightly better." His words were smooth and slick. He not only gave Qin Yunyan face to step down, but also made a conclusion. He did not offend anyone. When the crowd heard this, some people secretly nodded and admired Wang Jinyuan's shrewdness. Some people secretly sneered and despised Wang Jinyuan's way of playing both sides. After hearing Wang Jinyuan's words, Qin Yunyan seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Seeing that his shitty was about to say something, he scolded him in a low voice, "Shitty, don't say anything. This game. I lost." Qin Yunyan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said unwillingly, "Jinren Li, good method. I'm convinced." Li Yundong smiled slightly and also cupped his hands to return the salute. "Jinren Chen, your cultivation and kung fu are good, but it's a pity that some of your kung fu is used in the wrong place. If you can focus on the Tao, I believe that you can continue to make progress. If these words had been said by a senior cultivator, Qin Yunyan might have had to bow his head and listen respectfully. But in Qin Yunyan's opinion, Li Yundong looked even younger than him, and he was actually scolding him in front of everyone like an old man. Qin Yunyan was furious and snorted secretly. He cupped his hands to Li Yundong with an ugly expression and sat back in his seat. Wang Jinyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. Jinrenli, according to the rules of the Taoist assembly, it's time for you to defend the ring. Next, you will be challenged by various sects and clans until you are defeated. But you can rest for a while between each battle. Do you need to rest now? Zhou Qin, who was not far away, was shocked when she heard this. She couldn't help whispering, "What kind of rule is this? Wasn't this making things difficult for him? Why should I always accept challenges as the champion? What if I run out of strength in the last battle and get defeated?" Zi Yuan smiled helplessly and said, "Will battles are the characteristics of the Taoist assembly. If you weren't strong enough to suppress all the heroes, you wouldn't have been able to take away the prize magic treasure." Zhou Qin was stunned and whispered, "It's too cruel and unfair." Su Chan comforted Zhou Qin in a low voice, "Sister Zhou Qin, don't worry. Yundong will definitely be fine. He's very powerful now." The girls whispered to each other in private, but Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't answer Wang Jinyuan's words. Instead, he cupped his hands to the cultivators of the various sects and said, "Which fellow Taoist would like to come and teach me?" At this time, the cultivators of the various sects were all shocked and frightened by Li Yundong's magical skills just now. For a moment, no one took the initiative to fight. All of them were hoping that others would take the lead so that they could take advantage of the situation. Wang Jinyuan saw that everyone was silent and no one was going to fight. He frowned secretly and said in a clear voice, "According to the rules, if no one fights within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Jinrenli will automatically win." When the crowd heard this, there was a sudden commotion. No one was willing to let Li Yundong take away the immortal pen just like that, but they were even more unwilling to go out first to consume Li Yundong's Xunqi, and then let the latecomers take advantage of it. For a moment, everyone just looked at each other and encouraged each other to step forward. They tried their best to carry forward the spirit of internationalism. Wang Jinyuan saw that the people of the various sects were so scared by Li Yundong that they didn't dare to step forward. He frowned and quickly glanced at Sun Beidian, who was not far away. When Sun Beidian saw that Wang Jinyuan's gaze had swept over him, he immediately understood. He slowly walked to the front of the stage and said in a clear voice, "Jinrenli, your thunder-controlling skills are very powerful, but I wonder how good you are at the 5 elements Shintong." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Not bad." Sun Beidian laughed and said, "That's good. I only know a little bit of the 5 elements Kung Fu. Come on, Jinrenli, let's fight with the 5 elements Kung Fu." When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Sun Beidian had taken the initiative to step forward to fight, they all secretly breathed a sigh of relief and became faintly excited. Li Yundong's thunder-controlling skills just now were really powerful and frightening. However, no matter how powerful a person was, it was impossible for him to be proficient in all kinds of magic. They didn't know how good Li Yundong's 5 elements Shintong was. Sun Beidian was an old senior of the Gazao sect. He had been a famous great cultivator 20 years ago, and he was best at fighting with the 5 elements. Li Yundong's thunder-controlling skills were so abnormal. There was no reason for the 5 elements to be so abnormal, right? Chapter 481. Go to watch net. Li Yundong looked at Sun Beidian, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, "I wonder how Jinren's son wants to fight the 5 elements." Sun Beidian chuckled. He walked to the table, knocked on it, and said, "Jinrenli, why don't we use this table as the arena? The 2 of us will show our magical powers and see who has more mysterious changes. Whoever wins will win. What do you think?" Li Yundong was very curious and asked, "How do you do it on this table?" Sun Badian took out 5 bags from his clothes. Each bag was about the size of a fist. Sun Badian poured the 5 bags on the table. Everyone looked at them and saw that the 5 bags were filled with soil. However, the color of the soil in each bag was different. They were green, white, red, black, and yellow. Watch net. 7 KOM. Sun Badian put the 5 piles of soil on the table and wiped them with his hands. The 5 piles of soil of different colors were mixed together, forming a circular 8 trigrams pattern. Zhou Qin was curious and asked Zi Yuan in confusion, "Zi Yuan, what are you doing?" Zi Yuan said with a serious face, "I don't know either, but the 5 bags that Sun Badian took out should contain soil from the east, west, south, north, and center. I just don't know what he's going to do by taking out the soil and arranging it into such an 8 diagrams pattern." After Sun Badian arranged the 8 trigrams pattern, half of it was facing himself and the other half was facing Li Yundong. He said, "Zhenren, this 8 trigrams pattern is like a battlefield between 2 sides. The yin-yang line in the middle is the battle line between our 2 sides. Why don't we use our respective divine abilities and use this 8 trigrams as a battlefield to attack each other? Whoever completely pushes the battle to the other's yin and yang points first will lose. How about it?" Li Yundong looked down and saw 2 extremely conspicuous yin and yang dots on both sides of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, one black and one white. They were like 2 castles standing in the middle, staring at each other like tigers. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Zhenren Sun's method is really interesting. Well, let's do as you say." As soon as Li Yundong agreed, Sun Badian immediately burst out laughing. "Good, straightforward." The cultivators in the cabin also began to whisper to each other and discuss, "What kind of fight is this? Why haven't I heard of it before?" "That's right. How are they going to fight? Li Yundong is too bold. He dared to agree without knowing the rules. Haven't you heard of the saying, 'The skilled are bold'? Bullsh *T. How old is he? Even if he started cultivating in his mother's womb, it's impossible for him to be proficient in both thunder spells and all 5 element spells." When Su Chan and Zhou Qin saw that everyone was talking about it, they couldn't help but feel anxious for Li Yundong. Ruan Hongling looked at the field. She gently pulled Zi Yuan's sleeve and whispered, "Sister Zi Yuan, do you see anything? What was the meaning of this battle of magical powers? Why don't I get it?" Zi Yuan frowned slightly. She stared at the field without blinking, as if she was thinking about something. When she heard Wan Hongling's words, she said without looking back, "Although I don't know how Sun Badian is going to fight now, the 5 elements battle can't escape the principle of mutual enhancement and restraint." Sun Badian used the 5-colored soil of the east, south, west, and middle as his city and territory. The soil itself has different attributes of the 5 directions. Ruan Hongling's eyes lit up and she said in a low voice, "Yes, the corresponding color of the east is cyan, which belongs to wood, the corresponding color of the west is white, which belongs to gold, the corresponding color of the south is red, which belongs to fire, the corresponding color of the north is black, which belongs to water, the corresponding color of the center is yellow, which belongs to earth." This soil is originally an earth element, but it is mixed with the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, which greatly increases the difficulty of mutual enhancement and restraint of the 5 elements. Zi Yuan nodded slightly. Just as she was about to speak, Sun Badian suddenly cupped his hands to everyone and said, "Everyone, I invite you to watch a good show." After that, he waved his hand and gathered some of the soil in the 8 diagrams pattern in front of him into his palm. With his other hand, he quickly took out a talisman from his bosom and stuffed it into his palm. Then, he quickly blew on it. When Sun Badian opened his hand again, as soon as the soil particles in his palm fell into the 8 diagrams pattern on the round table, they immediately turned into clay figurines the size of a fingernail. These clay figurines had heads, faces, arms, and legs, as if they were living little people. When everyone saw this, they were suddenly shocked. Some cultivators suddenly stood up and said in surprise, "This is throwing soil to make soldiers." Zhou Qin was also taken aback and said, "What kind of magic is this? I've only heard of soldiers made from beans, but this is the first time I've heard of someone who can make soldiers out of soil." Zi Yuan frowned and quickly explained, "This is a talisman magic. Just now, Sun Badian must have used an earth-summoning magic. This kind of talisman must gather the spiritual qi of heaven and earth in it every day, so that it naturally has a spiritual nature. After a long time, it will catalyze everything it can come into contact with, even soil can become little people." Zhou Qin was shocked and said, "Such a magical magic? Can it turn into something else?" Zi Yuan's eyes were fixed on the field. She said, "It's not impossible, but human beings are the most intelligent of all living things. If they want to change, they will naturally change the most intelligent things. Who would change something of a lower level?" While the two of them were talking in low voices, Sun Badian suddenly waved his hand again and summoned a mahogany stool from the side. Sun Badian held the stool with both hands and exerted his strength. In an instant, the hard mahogany stool was crushed into countless small sawdust as if it were tofu. Sun Badian grabbed a handful of sawdust with one hand and muttered something in a low voice for a while. Then, with a wave of his hand, the sawdust in his hand turned into small pieces of wood of various shapes. But when everyone took a closer look, they saw that these small pieces of wood turned out to be ladders, chariots, catapults, and other siege weapons. Everyone instantly turned pale with fright, and all of them gasped in shock. To control these small sawdust into such small and sophisticated siege weapons with one's own magical power, what kind of terrifying would control magic was this? But before everyone had time to exclaim, Sun Badian laughed and waved his hand again. A bronze incense burner on the table next to him flew into his hand. He held the bronze incense burner with both hands, only to see that it seemed to be made of water. It deformed little by little, and after a while, it was kneaded into a ball of mud by him. Everyone in the cabin couldn't help but be shocked and exclaim, "Turning iron into mud." Zhou Qin had seen Shen Yunyan use the power of his Niden to compress a head-sized water ball into a thumb-sized ball. She had thought that this was an extremely terrifying kung fu and ability, but she hadn't expected that Sun Badian would be able to knead a bronze cauldron into a ball of mud as if he was kneading dough. Isn't this too terrifying? For a moment, everyone from the Fox Zen school was so shocked that they couldn't speak. Su Chan widened her eyes and looked at Sun Badian with a face full of fear. She said in a trembling voice, "What kind of cultivation is this? It's too scary, isn't it?" Zi Yuan said with an ugly expression, "Sun Badian is indeed a senior of the Gazao sect. He is also worthy of being a great cultivator who was famous in the world 20 years ago. In the past 20 years, he has disappeared without a trace. I didn't expect his cultivation to have advanced to such a level." Ruan Hongling also said with a face full of fear, "Shiji Zi Yuan, do you think he's hiding something in his palm? Otherwise, how could he knead bronze into mud with such great strength?" Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes lit up and she said, "Yes, as long as there is a fire magic hidden in the palm of his hand, and fire can subdue metal. When the temperature is high, the hard metal will naturally become soft." When everyone heard this, they felt a lot more at ease and said one after another, "That must be it." Su Chan patted her chest and said with a frightened face, "I was scared to death. I thought that this person was so strong that he could knead hard bronze like it was made of mud." Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "Even if that's not the case, we can't underestimate Sun Baitian's ability. Think about it, to be able to hide a fire spell in the palm of one's hand without leaving a single trace, this in itself requires an extremely strong control over the power of fire, and one must also control this power so that it doesn't hurt oneself, especially when the bronze reaches the melting point. Not only will one not be burned when holding an object, one can also move it freely. What kind of amazing ability is this?" When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but frown and look at Li Yundong worriedly. At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but look slightly surprised. He watched as Sun Badian kept digging a little bit from the iron mud and then throwing it on the table. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it turned into weapons one after another. There were knives, spears, swords, halberds, axes, knives, forks, and everything. These little clay men quickly picked up a weapon and then lined up neatly. Every step they took made a neat roar on the table, like a real army marching, giving people a sense of pressure that could not be underestimated. Especially when they walked to the dividing line of the yin-yang pattern, a clay man at the head walked out. As soon as this clay man raised his hand, the clay soldiers behind him suddenly stopped with a rumble. They were as neat as a lion that had been through hundreds of battles. The clay man at the head raised his long sword, and then the clay soldiers behind him immediately raised their weapons with a clatter. The table seemed to have grown into a forest of steel. Although the cultivators in the yacht felt that there was a distance between them, they still felt a cold murderous aura coming at them. They were all stunned, as if an army had suddenly appeared on the table and was about to attack the city in the next second. At this time, the yacht was so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Sun Badian looked at Li Yundong proudly and said, "Zhenrenli, let's get started, shall we?" As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the clay man at the head of the 8 diagrams on the round table suddenly slash the long sword in his hand forward. These densely packed clay men let out a loud roar and aggressively broke through the dividing line of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, rushing toward Li Yundong's stronghold. For a moment, everyone felt that the round table was a battlefield, and the clay men were warriors bathed in blood. They were like fierce beasts, roaring and pouncing forward. They were murderous, unstoppable, and invincible. Zi Yuan was shocked by the amazing momentum of these little clay men. She had never seen such a fight, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Zi Yuan widened her eyes and said, "What should we do? How should we deal with it?" Vote for recommendation. Previous page. Return to table of contents. Next page. Error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 482. Go to Watch Net. Although Li Yundong had stayed in the 3,000 small worlds of the Burning Thumb Pot for many years, had read almost all the classics of Buddhism and Taoism, and had learned almost all the magic, he had rarely used these magic in actual combat, especially in an incredible fight like the one in front of him. In the face of the swarming clay soldiers, Li Yundong was shocked and quickly began to cast magic. Go to Watch Net. 7 KOM. Li Yundong pointed his finger at the table, and soon the mud particles on the yin and yang boundary kept jumping. Each grain of mud was constantly expanding, and soon a high wall was formed, blocking the way of these clay soldiers. However, these clay soldiers were not discouraged at all when they hit the hard wall. They quickly separated into a line, and the clay soldiers behind them pushed the siege vehicles made by Sun Baitian's magic up one by one. These clay soldiers were either in groups of 30 or 50, surrounding a mud chariot, or more than a dozen people carrying ladders one after another, pouncing on the wall like ants. Li Yundong saw that although these clay soldiers were blocked by the wall for a while, they controlled the siege weapons and kept attacking the wall fiercely. Every time the chariot hit the wall, there would be a low rumble, and the wall would also emit a faint yellow light. Li Yundong looked at the table with a frown. He knew that this wall alone could not stop these clay soldiers from moving forward. It was already on the verge of collapse under the fierce impact of the siege vehicles controlled by the clay soldiers. In particular, some small clay men climbing the ladders had already climbed up the wall and began to jump down like dumplings. Li Yundong saw that more and more clay soldiers had climbed over the wall, and more cracks had gradually appeared in the wall he had built. His brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Seeing that these clay soldiers were about to rush to his stronghold, he suddenly had the urge to slap them into mud pancakes. Sun Badian, who was opposite Li Yundong, seemed to have noticed Li Yundong's thoughts. He chuckled and said, "Zhenrenli, we can't fight directly. We can only use magic to fight with the 5 elements. Otherwise, it will be considered cheating and we will lose. Li Yundong quickly raised his eyes to look at Sun Badian. He smiled slightly and lowered his eyes again. His mind was racing as he tried to think of a solution. Li Yundong thought to himself, this clay figurine is originally an earth magic, and wood restrains earth, so should I use wood magic to deal with it? Thinking of this, Li Yundong quickly mobilized his liver qi. The liver was of the wood attribute. As soon as he mobilized his liver qi, his face turned a little green. He pointed his finger at the table, and countless tiny vines quickly grew on the table, binding the little clay figures in place one by one. At this time, the people who were watching the battle had already left their original positions and gathered around the round table, watching this eye-opening battle attentively. Su Chan and the others clenched their fists anxiously and looked up at the table. They wished they could rush up and help. Seeing that Li Yundong had used wood magic to trap the clay soldiers in place, they couldn't help cheering in unison. But as soon as they shouted, they saw the clay soldiers quickly waving the weapons in their hands and looking at the wooden vines entangling their bodies. In just 2 or 3 moves, they had cut the wooden vines clean, and then rushed forward quickly. Li Yundong was slightly shocked. He hadn't expected that the weapons in the hands of these clay figurines would have such a magical effect. While he was stunned, he saw that the clay soldiers had already rushed to his stronghold. Seeing that he was about to lose, Li Yundong suddenly heard Zi Yuan's voice transmission saying, Li Yundong, blindly restraining the 5 elements is not enough. Sun Badian originally used the earth of the 5 directions. Although these clay soldiers themselves are of the earth attribute is mixed with the other 5 elements. Moreover, the weapons in the clay soldiers' hands are of the gold attribute. Gold restrains wood, so it naturally restrains your wood magic. You have to find a way to deal with these clay soldiers with the help of the 5 elements. Otherwise, you can't deal with them with just one magic. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He first quickly mobilized the earth magic and built a thick and tall earth wall around his stronghold. Although this earth wall was only as high as his forearm, it was already an insurmountable wall for these clay soldiers the size of a fingernail. After blocking the attack of the clay soldiers, Li Yundong temporarily took a breath and began to carefully think about what Zi Yuan had said before. He thought to himself, Zi Yuan is right. In theory, Sun Badian is attacking me with 3 kinds of magic, earth, gold, and wood. How can I resist him with only earth and wood? I have to mix the 5 kinds of magic together. Li Yundong saw that after these clay soldiers met the wall he had built with earth magic, they were ready to use the same trick again. They used siege weapons and ladders, trying to break through the wall at the same time. Li Yundong saw that the wall was shaking again and again under the fierce attack of the siege vehicles. He thought to himself, is there any way to make this wall impenetrable? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly had an idea. He thought, among the 5 elements, fire gives birth to earth. If I use fire to urge earth, I think the earth magic will be even more powerful. Li Yundong's mind was working fast. He rubbed his fingers together, and a burning fireball appeared on his fingertips. Most of the cultivators around him were discerning. As soon as they saw Li Yundong's movements, they had already guessed what he was going to do. Immediately, a cultivator nodded secretly and said in a low voice, yes, using fire to urge earth can make your own city wall more stable. Moreover, fire can restrain gold, and it can also restrain the gold weapons in the hands of the clay men. But there were also cultivators who sneered and said, don't be silly. Sun Baitian's clay men are also of the earth element. Once you use fire, they will also become stronger. Su Chan saw that the area of Li Yundong's territory on the round table had been reduced to a very small area. Sun Baitian's army had already arrived at the city and surrounded the stronghold. The little girl couldn't help but feel anxious, but she couldn't do anything to help. She could only stare at the small war on the round table like the others. Seeing that Li Yundong was going to use fire magic to deal with him, Sun Badian smiled and waved his hands, summoning a water ball on the teacup next to him. As soon as Li Yundong released the fire magic, he would use water magic to restrain Li Yundong's magic. Seeing Sun Baitian's movements, Li Yundong smiled slightly and waved his other hand in the air, summoning all the tea in the teacup in front of him into his palm. He held a fireball in one hand and a water ball in the other. There was a thoughtful and focused expression on his face. Obviously, this battle was no longer simply about who had stronger spiritual power and who was more proficient in the 5 elements of magic. It was more about wisdom and strategy. Everyone saw that Li Yundong could control both water and fire magic freely. Before they had time to marvel in their hearts, they saw Li Yundong suddenly throw the water ball in his hand onto the table. With a crash, the table seemed to have turned into a swamp, and all the clay soldiers were soaked in the water. Sun Badian frowned and threw the water ball in his hand into the air. At the same time, he quickly summoned a ball of fire with one hand and quickly took out a talisman with the word Earth written on it with the other. He threw the fireball and the talisman at the clay men on the table at the same time. The clay men were strengthened by the earth magic and stimulated by the fire magic. Suddenly, their bodies grew larger, from the size of a pinky nail to the size of a thumb. These clay figurines were originally covered in water above their heads. Now, they could only reach their waists in the water. With a shout, they quickly dug up the soil on the table with the weapons in their hands. In just a short while, they dug out one river after another, and the water on the table flowed obediently down the river. The surrounding cultivators nodded one after another and said, Li Yundong clearly knows that earth restrains water, but he still used water to wash it. Isn't he asking for trouble? But as soon as they finished speaking, they saw Li Yundong quickly throw the fireball in his hand at the mud wall. The mud wall suddenly burst into a blazing flame with a bang. In the burning flame, the mud wall seemed to have a life of its own and kept growing taller and taller. It had grown from the height of a forearm to the height of an arm and the thickness of a palm. For an adult, this was just a mud castle like a child's house, but for a clay man the size of a thumb, it was already an almost indestructible super fortress. Only then did everyone understand that Li Yundong had deliberately used water to attack the other side in order to attract Sun Baitian's attention. At the same time, he had used fire to make the wall taller and thicker. This was a tactic of diversion. Sun Badian frowned secretly. He quickly glanced at Li Yundong, snorted, and said, "Jinrenli, you can use fire, but I can't." After saying that, he rubbed his hands together, and the palms of his hands were ignited with blazing flames. With a wave of his hand, he threw the flames in his hands toward the dense clay soldiers on the table. But as soon as he moved, Li Yunyang quickly chuckled. He raised his hand, and the tea in the teacup in the cabin of the cruise ship automatically jumped up. Like a high-pressure water column, it rushed toward the flame thrown by Sun Badian and scattered it in an instant. Sun Badian frowned. He was unwilling to give up and mobilized wood magic again. Once again, he created a siege weapon several times larger than before and launched an attack on Li Yundong's stronghold. Li Yundong also reacted accordingly. He mobilized gold magic and imitated Sun Baitian's method of kneading a bronze incense burner into iron mud. Then, he threw the iron mud around his stronghold. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it immediately turned into a strict iron wall, as if the stronghold was covered with a layer of hard armor. Without saying a word, Sun Badian immediately mobilized fire magic again and burned it toward the hard metal armor outside Li Yundong's stronghold. Li Yundong also immediately called water to extinguish the fire. But this time, before Sun Baitian's fire met the water, he suddenly controlled all the clay men on the table to throw all the wood siege weapons into the fire. This time, wood gave birth to fire, and the flames became extremely strong. Although water could restrain fire, because the water was too weak, Li Yundong couldn't resist it for a while, and the flames burned the metal wall. As soon as the metal wall was burned by the fire, it immediately turned red, and there were signs of softening and collapsing. Seeing the opportunity, Li Yundong immediately removed the iron wall and led the fire to his stronghold. As soon as his stronghold was burned by the fire gave birth to earth, which once again helped Li Yundong's stronghold, making it taller and stronger. At this time, the people in the cabin saw Li Yundong and Sun Baidian fighting back and forth, dealing with each other's moves. Their speed was so fast that it was dizzying. In particular, the round table was like a battlefield. It was really like a small battle, making some cultivators who didn't have time to think only feel like they were watching a magic movie. It was as if they were there, watching to their heart's content and cheering. As the saying goes, the layman watches the fun, while the expert watches the artistry. Some cultivators only felt that the battle was very lively, but they couldn't keep up with the changes of the two people to think. Some cultivators could faintly see that Li Yundong and Sun Baidian were racking their brains to use the 5 elements magic to constantly attack and defend. In particular, the two of them used the 5 elements magic without thinking, not only showing their superb control skills of the 5 elements, but also their superior reaction and wisdom. Especially in the face of Sun Baitian's aggressive attack, Li Yundong, who was at an absolute disadvantage at the beginning, slowly gained a foothold. Although he was facing a bad situation where the army was pressing on, he calmly dealt with it and thwarted Sun Baitian's attacks one after another. Not only did he stabilize his position, but he was also temporarily invincible. The cultivators in the field saw this and secretly admired him. They couldn't help thinking, if I were Li Yundong, would I be able to block Sun Baitian's attack, which was like a raging tide? Chapter 483. Go to Watch Network. Although Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school looked down on the Gazao sect and secretly regarded Li Yundong as a thorn in her side, she couldn't help but sigh to Zhou Ping when she saw this scene. During the Warring States period, the king of Chu summoned Lu Ban and built a large number of siege weapons to attack the Song dynasty. When Moz heard the news, he traveled thousands of miles to the Chu kingdom and launched a siege battle with Lu Ban. In that battle, Moz used his belt as a city wall and launched an offensive and defensive demonstration against Lu Ban. As a result, Lu Ban changed the siege technique 9 times, but Moz easily resolved it. I didn't expect that after more than 2,000 years, this offensive and defensive battle would reappear in such a form in front of us today. What an anomaly. Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong with an extremely complicated gaze. She said indignantly in her heart, "Master, how could Li Yundong have cultivated for such a short period of time? How could he use so many magic arts? His thunder magic is so powerful, but why is he so proficient in the 5 elements magic?" Zhang Ling also looked at Li Yundong and shook her head slightly. She said in a low voice, "This boy must have had some kind of adventure again. Otherwise, it would be impossible for his magic cultivation to improve so quickly in such a short period of time." Zhou Ping glanced worriedly at Zhang Tianhe, who was standing next to her with a serious face. She whispered to Zhang Ling, "Master, then Shidi." Although Zhang Ling didn't like Li Yundong very much, she was also a rare great cultivator in the cultivation world, so she naturally knew what was good and what was bad. It was impossible for her to forcibly describe a short person as tall and a tall person as short in front of her disciple. Zhang Ling frowned slightly and shook her head at Zhou Ping, motioning for her to stop talking. Zhou Ping immediately shut her mouth. She knew that even her master was not optimistic about Zhang Tianhe's ability to compete with Li Yundong. Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said, "Shidi has been working hard to cultivate since he was humiliated and returned to the mountain last time. This time, his cultivation has improved greatly. He wanted to avenge his previous humiliation, but he didn't expect Li Yundong to improve even faster. I really don't know how sad he should be." Zhou Ping looked at Zhang Tianhe worriedly, but Zhang Tianhe stared at the field as if he didn't feel anything. His body trembled slightly, and he unconsciously clenched his fists. Although his face was expressionless, his eyes revealed strong jealousy and unwillingness. Just as the people outside were engrossed in this rare and wonderful battle, a small sparrow suddenly landed on the skylight of the yacht. This small sparrow stuck its head out and looked inside the skylight. After a while, a paper crane landed next to this sparrow. The paper crane and the sparrow stared at each other for a while, then turned their heads in unison and continued to look into the cabin. At this time, the battle in the cabin had become white-hot. Li Yundong began to change from defense to offense. He was becoming more and more proficient in the control of the 5 elements, and his understanding of the mutual promotion and restraint of the 5 elements was becoming deeper and deeper. At this time, the round table was no longer the scene of a dense group of clay soldiers attacking the city. Li Yundong's stronghold had become an impregnable stronghold. Under Sun Baitian's fierce attack, not only was the stronghold not weakened, but it had also become stronger and taller because of Li Yundong's ingenious use of force. However, Li Yundong's stronghold had become taller and larger, and Sun Baitian had no choice but to upgrade his clay soldiers and weapons. The clay soldiers, which had been the size of a fingernail, had gradually become the size of a baby's fist. The cultivators watching even had an illusion that if the two of them continued to fight like this, sooner or later, the stronghold in front of Li Yundong would become a real ultimate stronghold, and sooner or later, Sun Baitian's clay soldiers would also become human-sized clay soldiers. While Sun Baitian was attacking the stronghold, Li Yundong also began to build his own army and began to attack Sun Baitian's stronghold. Everyone saw that Li Yundong was mobilizing his Jinshi to fight against Sun Baitian with all his might. For a moment, the clay soldiers on the table were fighting each other. On top of them, the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth were flying everywhere. One moment, Li Yundong had gained the upper hand in one battlefield, and the next moment, Sun Baitian had turned the tables on another battlefield. The two of them seemed to be fighting on a sand table battlefield. At this time, Li Yundong's Jinshi had reached its peak state. Although his face looked normal, white steam was rising from the top of his head. Sun Baitian's face changed from red to green, and the colors changed back and forth, like a chameleon. Sun Baitian saw that Li Yundong's stronghold was becoming stronger and stronger, while his own side had been attacking for a long time. His Jinshi was already a little weak, but his opponent, Li Yundong, was still full of divine light. His eyes were bright and unfathomable, as if he still had a lot of strength left. Sun Baitian was secretly shocked and thought to himself, I've cultivated for decades, but I've never seen anyone with such a powerful and long aura. What's more, this person is so young. How did he cultivate? What's more, he is the leader of the Fox Zen school. I heard that this person has a bad reputation and is a lustful person. But how could a lustful person have such a powerful and majestic aura? Sun Baitian was secretly shocked. He gritted his teeth and tried his best to hold on, but the momentum of the previous fierce attack was too strong and had consumed a lot of Jinshi. At this time, Li Yundong commanded his army to attack. It was really like a fierce beast coming out of its cage, like a flood opening the floodgates. In an instant, the battle line rushed back to the boundary between Yin and Yang, and his clay soldiers were beaten back again and again. At this time, the sharp-eyed cultivators knew that Sun Baitian was already an arrow at the end of its flight and could no longer hold on under Li Yundong's tide-like attacks. They shook their heads and sighed to themselves, it's a pity that Sun Baitian lost like this. I don't know who this Li Yundong is. Even his 5 elements magic is so powerful that he can defeat Sun Baitian, who came prepared. Terrible, it's really terrible. But just as they were sighing, Li Yundong's troops and Sun Baitian's troops were fighting and colliding in the middle of the round table. Suddenly, the round table could not bear the heavy burden. With a crack, it broke into 2 pieces and fell in each of the 2 men's directions. Li Yundong and Sun Baitian were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and did not speak for a while. Li Yundong looked at Sun Baitian, as if asking him if he wanted to continue. However, Sun Baitian seemed to not see Li Yundong's gaze. He just glanced at him and quickly withdrew his gaze, trying to adjust his breathing. Everyone saw that Sun Baitian was sweating profusely at this time, as if he had just been fished out of a water tank. Although Li Yundong was a little out of breath, his face was very normal, and there was not a drop of sweat on his body. When the two of them compared, it was obvious who was superior. Wang Zhenyuan frowned secretly when he saw the result of the battle. Soon, he had an idea and burst into laughter and applauded. Wonderful, it's really wonderful. At this time, the crowd on the scene seemed to have woken up from a dream, and they burst into cheers and applause. Although this battle of magical powers was not as earth-shattering as the previous one, this battle of magical powers not only compared the two's cultivation and understanding of the 5 elements, but also compared the two's strategies and intelligence. This battle of magical powers was not only a live battle of offense and defense, but it was also the perfect application of military strategy in a battle of magical powers. Everyone couldn't help but be convinced by this. Just as the crowd was cheering deafeningly, the sparrow, who had been watching the scene from the skylight, suddenly spread its wings and flew up. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky. After flying in one direction for a while, it finally landed in the palm of an old man. This old man was wearing a black kimono and a pair of wooden clogs. He was Master Xinyan of the Rigoino Jinyin Tantrism in Japan, whom Li Yundong had met once in Shiyuan Temple. The old man gently stroked the sparrow in the palm of his hand with his wrinkled hand. He sighed softly and said, "Alas, I didn't expect that China, which claims to be the great China and the heavenly kingdom, would degenerate to such an extent. So many cultivators had actually been reduced to acrobatics. Sad, lamentable." Standing next to him was Shinsu, who had confronted Li Yundong before. The young monk was still wearing a famous brand suit and standing humbly behind a little girl. After hearing Master Xinyan's words, he said, "Master Xinyan, you worry too much. These cultivators have to fight secretly. How can they have any real ability?" Tachibana Wakako, who was wearing a red kimono with white flowers, looked like a cute doll. She looked up at Xinyan and said with a smile, "But Master Xinyan, I think their battle just now was very interesting." Xinyan shook his head and sighed. "Tachibana Wakako, after all, you are still a child, so you will find it interesting. In my opinion, what happened just now was simply a farce. In our Japanese cultivation world, this is simply incredible. A battle is a battle. This is a sacred and solemn matter. How can it be treated as a joke? In our cultivation world, a battle is a battle. If you don't win, you will die." Tachibana Wakako blinked her eyes as if she understood and asked naively, "Master Xinyan, do we still want to go to their Taoist assembly?" Xinyan thought for a moment and hesitated. While he was hesitating, he heard Shinsu say, "Master Xinyan, please allow me to go to the Taoist assembly and fight with Li Yundong. It will also let these Chinese cultivators know what a real battle is." Xinyan shook his head without thinking and said, "No, we're not here to cause trouble this time." Shinsu was greatly disappointed, but he didn't say anything more. He lowered his head obediently and stood respectfully behind Tachibana Wakako like a servant, not saying another word. However, Tachibana Wakako was a little unwilling. She pulled on Xinyan's sleeve and kept begging, "Master Xinyan, it's not easy for me to come out, and I happen to run into such a fun Taoist assembly. Let me go and have a look. I beg you, I beg you." Xinyan looked at Tachibana Wakako lovingly. He thought about it carefully and smiled helplessly. "Well, Tachibana Wakako, I really can't do anything to you." When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she was overjoyed and cheered, "Hooray! Master Xinyan is the best. Don't worry, I will be very obedient and won't cause any trouble." Hearing this, Xinyan put his hands in his sleeves and said proudly, "So what if you cause trouble? How can these cultivators, who treat fighting as children's games, be worthy of being our opponents?" After that, he burst out laughing. His laughter was like thunder, startling the little sparrow in his hand and causing it to fly away into the distance. I'm sorry, but because I don't have any manuscripts, the update time has become very unstable. I hope you can understand. In addition, there's no need to join groups 1 to 13. They're all full. If you want to join, please join group 14, 143153640. I can't guarantee when Group 14 will be full. If you want to join, hurry up. Chapter 484. Go to watch net. When Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako decided to go to the Taoist assembly, Li Yundong, who was on the yacht, had already become the target of public criticism. Go to watch net. Although there had only been 2 rounds of fighting, the strength Li Yundong had shown was enough to make the cultivators of all sects deeply afraid. Since ancient times, there had been no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Who wouldn't be jealous of the person who occupied the first place? Who wouldn't want to pull the first place down and climb up to it themselves? Dang Chung of the Penglai sect shook his head and said loudly, Jinren's son, what a good battle. I've lived for so many years, and it's the first time I've seen such a unique battle. It's wonderful, really wonderful. However, although this battle is wonderful, there should always be a winner. Who won just now? This question hit the hearts of everyone. Putting aside the brilliance of the battle just now, everyone's selfishness suddenly became heavy again. They thought to themselves, a great cultivator who is proficient in thunder magic and the 5 elements of magic is simply a great cultivator. Moreover, the most frightening thing is that he is still so young. If he continues to be so arrogant, how can I stand up for myself? Ding Nan looked at Li Yundong in shock. She unconsciously stammered, he's too strong. How could he be so strong? Jing Yuan's face was gloomy, and his vigilance toward Li Yundong had been raised to the peak. It was the first time he had felt so strongly that a person was such a huge and terrible threat to him. This kind of vigilance and nervousness made him not even notice the strong admiration in Ding Nan's tone. He thought that his disciple LV Fengping was groaning in despair because she couldn't take revenge. There was a trace of coldness in Jing Yuan's eyes. He thought to himself, no, I can't let this guy get the immortal pen. Otherwise, although the world is big, there will be no place for our sects. He glanced around and saw that the cultivators of all sects were looking at Li Yundong with complicated expressions, their eyes full of jealousy. His heart skipped a beat, and a smile appeared on his face. He said to a cultivator of the Shinshao sect beside him in a tone of praise and appreciation, 500 years ago, Jinren Zhang, and 500 years later, Jinren Li. Good. I really didn't expect our cultivation world to produce such a great cultivator, and he's so young. Amazing, really amazing. When the cultivators next to him heard this, they couldn't help but look at Jing Yuan, as if to distinguish whether he was sincerely praising him or not. An older cultivator of the Shinshao sect snorted and said with some dissatisfaction, Zhang Sanfeng is indeed a great Jinren, but I don't know if Li Yundong is a great Jinren or not, but he can't be considered a great Jinren now. He's too young. When Jing Yuan saw that there were indeed some cultivators around him who were not convinced and angry, he was delighted. He continued to fan the flames and said, that's not true. As the saying goes, heroes come from young people since ancient times. With such a young man, us old bones can rest assured. This older cultivator was the elder cultivator of the Shinshao sect. His name was Lu Yuqing. In terms of seniority, he was the same as Sun Beidian. He was also a great cultivator who lived in seclusion. This time, he had brought his disciples to participate in the Taoist assembly. Originally, he wanted to show off, but he hadn't expected to be shocked by Li Yundong before he even got on the stage. When Lu Yuqing heard this, he frowned and looked at Jing Yuan with an unfriendly look. He said gloomily, Leader Zheng, what do you mean by that? Jing Yuan stroked his beard and said with a smile, Jinren Lu, don't you think so? Cultivators these days cultivate too quickly. We are old. We can't catch up. In a few years, it will be their world. Although Jing Yuan's voice was not loud, almost everyone on the yacht heard him. Su Chan and Wan Hongling had confronted Jing Yuan face to face before, so they knew that this kind-looking old man was a villain with a vicious heart and a dagger hidden in his smile. Seeing that Jing Yuan was praising Li Yundong like this, they immediately looked at each other. Ruan Hongling asked curiously, what's this old thing thinking? Why is he praising Li Yundong like this? Su Chan also blinked and looked at Jing Yuan with a puzzled expression. Could it be that he sees that Yundong is too powerful, so he wants to make peace with us? Ruan Hongling sneered and said, Humph, this man is full of evil water. If you ask me, he must be up to something. How can he have good intentions? I don't believe it. Zi Yuan saw that Ruan Hongling's words were so unscrupulous and loud that they attracted the attention of the cultivators from the sects next to them. She frowned and gently stepped on Ruan Hongling's foot under the table. Ruan Hongling felt the pain in her toes and quickly shrank her feet. She looked at Zi Yuan with dissatisfaction and snorted twice, but in the end, she didn't say anything more unpleasant. Zi Yuan was a calm and low-key person, so she didn't want to cause trouble. However, Zhou Qin had just reached the Zhuji phase, so she was full of spirit. After hearing Ruan Hongling and Su Chan's words, she thought for a moment and sneered. This is a trick of praising Li Yundong openly and secretly. Zheng Yuan wants to incite the other sects to have a common hatred for Li Yundong and then attack him together. When Su Chan and the others heard this, they couldn't help but look at the cultivators of the other sections. Sure enough, they saw many meaningful gazes in everyone's eyes. There was no lack of jealousy in them. They were shocked and said angrily, it must be like this. Damn it, it's shameful. Su Chan asked anxiously, Sister Zi Yuan, what should we do now? Zi Yuan pondered for a while, then said in a low voice, it's better to let Li Yundong admit defeat or a draw. It's really not worth offending all the sects in the cultivation world for the sake of the immortal pen. But as soon as she finished speaking, Ruan Hongling and Zhou Qin blurted out at the same time, no. Ruan Hongling said anxiously, Shiji Zi Yuan, what nonsense are you talking about? This is the Taoist assembly, which is held once every 4 years. Do you think you can give up just because you say so? Zhou Qin also raised her eyebrows and said, Zi Yuan, I don't agree with you. Does a person who is too strong have to try to cover up his own light and strength? How can there be such a reason in the world? Zi Yuan shook her head slightly and said with a wry smile, you don't know. My master Wang Yuanshan. He was like this when he was young. His strength was too outstanding, and he didn't know how to restrain himself when he was young. As a result, he was rejected wherever he went, so no one wanted to get close to him and everyone said bad things about him. Su Chan was slightly shocked. She quickly thought, it turns out that Wang Yuanshan is such a person. Isn't my master the same? He is eccentric and arrogant. No wonder the two of them fell in love at first sight. It turns out to be like this. Yundong can't become like this. I don't want him to become like this. Thinking of this, the little girl suddenly whispered tentatively, why don't we let Yundong admit defeat? Anyway, this battle does look like a draw. Although Zhou Qin was aggressive, she was also a very sensible person. She hesitated for a moment and said, I don't know what master thinks. While they were talking in private, Wan Jinyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong and Sun Beidian, saying, Jinren Sun, Jinren Li, in my opinion, this battle is a draw. What do you think? When Sun Beidian, who was adjusting his qi, heard this, he quickly glanced at Wan Jinyuan and blushed. He knew in his heart that the leader was protecting his face and wanted to give him a draw. Otherwise, if word got out that he, an old cultivator who had cultivated the 5 elements magic for decades, could not defeat a young man who had only cultivated for half a year, how could he bear it? How could he face others? The cultivators of the other sects were also well aware of this. Many cultivators were unwilling to see Li Yundong win 2 games in a row, so most of them were silent about this. Du Fei and the others wanted to say a few words of fairness, but they swallowed their words because they were afraid of offending more of their fellow cultivators. Only Dang Chang jumped up and shook his head loudly. No, no. When Wan Jinyuan heard him speak, he frowned, but he quickly relaxed and said with a smile, Dang Chang, what's your opinion? Dang Chang said loudly, in my opinion, Sun Badian, Jinren's son, won this round. When everyone heard this, they were immediately surprised and looked at Dang Chong. Wang Jinyuan was also stunned. He hadn't expected that Dang Chong would speak up for him. He was overjoyed and said with a fake smile, Jinren Dang, what do you mean by that? Although Sun Baitian's expression was a little unnatural, he still looked at Dang Chong curiously. He wanted to see what kind of wise opinion this guy, who liked to joke around, was going to say. Dang Chong pointed at Sun Badian proudly and said, look, Jinren's son is sweating all over, but Jinren Li doesn't have a drop of sweat. Just now, Jinren's son adjusted his qi for a long time and didn't dare to say a word, but Jinren Li's qi was calm. In comparison, didn't Sun Badian win? When everyone heard this, they thought, oh my god, this guy is saying the opposite. Sun Baitian's face turned blue when he heard this, and he was so angry that his whole body was trembling. Wang Jinyuan's face also turned purple. He shouted angrily, Dang Chong, you've gone too far. You have no respect for your elders. Dang Chong opened his mouth wide and said with a blank face, what's wrong with me? Am I wrong? Wang Jinyuan was furious, but he couldn't point out Dang Chong's words clearly. Otherwise, he would directly admit that Sun Badian had lost. In a hurry, he shouted angrily, what do you mean by that? Dang Chong said with an aggrieved and innocent face, didn't you just decide who would win by working the hardest? I saw that Jinren's son's forehead was full of sweat. Obviously, he worked the hardest. Everyone immediately burst out laughing. Wei Qin, who was eager to see the world in chaos, also said in a low voice, then isn't the brick hauler the best in the world? Du Fei held back his laughter, glared at her, and shouted in a low voice, shut up, don't talk nonsense. Ruan Hongling, who was sitting not far from them, heard this and said in a strange tone, nonsense, the coal digger is the best. After that, everyone burst into laughter. When cultivators fought, the most important thing was to be unrestrained, calm, and free. The more powerful a cultivator was, the more ethereal he would be when he used magic, just like an immortal. In their opinion, only people with low levels would be in such a sorry state. Dang Chong's words were like a slap in Sun Baitian's face. Sun Badian snorted angrily and stamped his foot, causing the yacht to tremble. He turned around and rushed out. Wang Jinyuan was very anxious and quickly chased after him. Shibwa, Shibwa. But no matter how he shouted, Sun Badian covered his face with his sleeves and left quickly, refusing to look back. Wang Jinyuan gritted his teeth with hatred. A murderous look flashed in his eyes, and his face suddenly became extremely sinister and ferocious. But when he turned around again, Wang Jinyuan's face became calm again. He laughed and said, Shibwa left first. Jinren Li won the previous battle. Hearing this, Zhou Qin and the others sneered in their hearts. If you win, you win. What do you mean by that? Wang Jinyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong, saying, Jinren Li, congratulations on winning another round. Are you ready for the next one? Li Yundong had been standing there with a smile on his face. In the face of the various gazes and private discussions of the crowd, he was like a mountain that had been brushed by a breeze. His emotions did not fluctuate at all. He cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan and said with a smile, I'm ready, Master Wan. But who will be the next one? Everyone looked at each other for a while and thought to themselves, even Sun Badian has lost. Can I guarantee that I will win if I go up? For a moment, there was silence in the yacht. Only Zheng Yuan shook his head and sighed softly. Jinren Li is really young and vigorous. No matter what, he will consume a lot of Jinqi in 2 consecutive battles. He doesn't know how to rest well before going up. Alas. Although his words seemed to be a kind reminder, everyone's heart skipped a beat when they heard it. Yes, Li Yundong has fought 2 battles in a row. No matter how powerful he is, he must have consumed a lot of Jinqi. If we go up at this time, won't we get a big advantage? Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others couldn't help but be furious when they heard this. They said in unison, Jing Yuan is hateful. Su Chan said anxiously, Jing Yuan is up to no good. He's inciting everyone to exhaust Yundong to death. Zi Yuan frowned and said, that's right, but I don't know if anyone will come out to be cannon fodder. As soon as she finished speaking, an elder of the Shinshao sect stood up and said in a clear voice, I'm Lu Yuqing of the Shinshao sect. Jinrenli, shall we have a fight? Su Chan was shocked. Is there really someone who wants to be cannon fodder? Ruan Hongling sneered and said, you think that he is cannon fodder, but he thinks that he might get a big advantage. It doesn't matter if he loses. Anyway, Qin Yunyan and Sun Beidian have already lost, so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. But if he wins, he will earn back everything. When the girls heard this, they all gritted their teeth and cursed. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, saw that Li Yundong was smiling and was about to make an obeisance. Suddenly, an impulse surged in her heart. She stood up abruptly and said loudly, I'll do it this time. Her voice was loud and sudden, instantly attracting everyone's attention, and they all turned to look at her. Lu Yuqing looked her up and down and frowned. Who are you? Why are you here? Zhou Qin took a deep breath, calmed down, and cupped her hands in a clear voice. As the saying goes, when the master needs something, the disciple will do it for him. Lu Yuqing was slightly surprised and said, are you Li Yundong's disciple? Zhou Qin said loudly, yes, I am Li Yundong's first disciple, Zhou Qin. It's even later. I just finished writing a chapter, and there will be another chapter in the evening, but it may be a little late. I don't know the specific time. Don't wait, everyone. Get up in the morning and read it. In addition, Group 14 is full. Wipe your sweat. Don't join it. I just opened a supergroup of 500 people, 28092211. Everyone, please join it. If the group of 200 people is full in one day, then the group of 500 people can at least last for 2 days, right? Haha. Thank you to group owner Jio for providing a supergroup of 500 people. Chapter 485. Go to watch net. Zhou Qin's words made the cabin suddenly quiet down. The cultivators of all sects looked at Zhou Qin strangely. Lu Yuqing even raised his head and laughed out loud. The young cultivators of the Shinshao sect who were accompanying him also let out a burst of mocking laughter. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Lu Yuqing chuckled and didn't say anything. A disciple of the Shinshao sect next to him said loudly, you're so shameless. How can you claim to be the first disciple of the sect? Lu Yuqing chuckled and did not say anything. A disciple of the Shinshao sect next to him said loudly, how shameless. How can anyone claim to be the first disciple of the sect? Li Yundong is just a small leader of the Fox Zen school. How dare you claim to be the first disciple of the sect? What kind of sect are you running? After that, they burst into laughter again. At this time, the cultivators of the other sects on the yacht also made fun of Zhou Qin's misfortune and pointed their fingers at her. Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin standing where she was, her face flushed and her body trembling slightly with anger. He walked over to Zhou Qin, patted her on the shoulder, and whispered, Zhou Qin, we cultivators need to cultivate ourselves. We need to pay attention to controlling our emotions and temper. Forget it, I'll be fine. You. But before Li Yundong could finish his words, Zhou Qin acted as if she hadn't heard him. She suddenly took a step forward, pointed at Lu Yuqing, and shouted excitedly, don't talk so much nonsense. Do you dare to fight? Li Yundong was stunned and looked at his classmate and proud disciple in confusion. He didn't understand why Zhou Qin, who had always been very obedient to him, suddenly lost control of her emotions and turned a deaf ear to his words. Li Yundong was about to speak, but he suddenly felt a hand gently pinching his fingertips. He turned his head and saw Zi Yuan shaking her head slightly at him. Although Li Yundong was puzzled, he swallowed what he had said to Zhou Qin out of trust in Ziyuan. Li Yundong didn't know that Zhou Qin could tolerate others' contempt and mockery of her, but she absolutely couldn't tolerate others' contempt and mockery of Li Yundong. In the face of Zhou Qin's challenge, Lu Yuqing's eyes showed a touch of disdain and sarcasm, but he did not lose his mind because of it. He knew that even if he won against Zhou Qin, there would be no benefits. On the contrary, he would be notorious for bullying the weak, and a man bullying a woman. Lu Yuqing snorted, sneered, turned his face away, and looked at Wang Jinyuan. Li cupped his hands and said, Master Wan, according to convention, can you send your own disciples to participate in the battle for you? Wan glanced at Zhou Qin and said with a smile, Wang Jinyuan. According to the rules of the Taoist assembly, the disciple can take on a battle for the master, but the outcome must also be counted. If the disciple loses, it will be regarded as the master's loss, and from then on, he will be disqualified from participating in the competition for the treasure. According to the rules of the Taoist assembly, it doesn't matter if I lose, but if I cause Li Yundong to lose the right to participate in the competition, it will be a big crime. Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin looking at him, and his heart suddenly tightened. He knew that Zhou Qin had lost her confidence in winning and her aggressive spirit. She began to look forward and backward, worried about personal gains and losses. When Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin looking at him, his heart suddenly tightened and he knew that it was not good, because he knew that at this time, Zhou Qin had lost the confidence to win and the aggressive spirit from before. She began to look forward and backward, worrying about personal gains and losses. Once they fell into it, if they accepted the challenge, it would be fine if they won, but if they lost, they would fall into endless self-blame and regret, which was extremely disadvantageous to their cultivation. It could even be said that if they didn't have great opportunities and great determination, they would basically become second-rate cultivators, no matter how excellent their talent was. Moreover, once they were caught in it, it would be fine if they won, but if they lost, they would fall into endless self-blame and regret. It was extremely detrimental to their cultivation. It could even be said that without great opportunities and great determination, a cultivator would basically be reduced to a second-rate cultivator no matter how talented they were. Moreover, if Zhou Qin did not accept the challenge, then her Taoist heart would be broken, because no matter when she cultivated in the future, as long as she thought of what had happened today, she would regret retreating at the last minute and fall into a demonic barrier from then on. Zheng Yuan, who also understood this, sneered. He took a meaningful look at Zhou Qin and then at Wang Jinyuan. Ding Nan, who was standing to one side, was very concerned about Zhou Qin. When she saw Zheng Yuan sneer, she quickly asked, Master, what are you laughing at? Are you laughing at Zhou Qin for overestimating herself? Zheng Yuan shook his head and said in a low voice, No, I'm laughing at Wang Jinyuan's ulterior motives. He didn't have to say the last sentence, but he said it. What do you think his intentions were? This sentence can be said to be a trap for Zhou Qin. No matter what she chooses, it will be difficult for her to escape from this trap. Otherwise, she will fall into a demonic barrier, and from then on, it will be difficult for her to make any progress in her cultivation. Ding Nan looked at her former, good sister, with a complicated look in her eyes. She bit her lips slightly and asked, Is there no other way? Zheng Yuan sneered and said, Yes. Accept the challenge, and you must win. Otherwise, Zhou Qin's cultivation will be over. Ding Nan took a deep look at Zhou Qin and suddenly whispered, She will definitely win. Zheng Yuan sneered and said, Are you kidding? At best, Zhou Qin is just a cultivator who has just reached the Zhuji phase. How can she defeat Lu Yuqing? Do you know who Lu Yuqing is? He is the shitty of the leader of the Shinshao sect, and his Shintong Kung Fu has been famous all over the world for more than a decade. How could Zhou Qin be his match? Hey, no matter which path Zhou Qin chooses, it will almost be the end of her cultivation. Wang Jinyuan is really good at scheming. Amazing, really amazing. As he said this, Zheng Yuan said earnestly to Ding Nan, Pinger, you have to study hard. Fighting is not just about cultivation and spiritual energy, nor is it about whose powerful magical weapon is stronger. You see, Wang Jinyuan has almost destroyed a good cultivation seedling with one sentence. This is called a silver tongue, which can fight against millions of soldiers. But Ding Nan didn't seem to hear him. She looked at Zhou Qin attentively and repeated stubbornly, "She will win. She has to win." Jing Yuan was surprised and asked, "Oh, why?" There was a strange light in Ding Nan's eyes. She gritted her teeth and said word by word, "Because she must be defeated by me." Jing Yuan was stunned and thought, why is Ping Er so strange? Why does it seem like she has an irreconcilable hatred for Zhou Qin? As the two of them spoke in low voices, Li Yundong gave Wang Jinyuan a meaningful look. Then, he turned his face and said to Zhou Qin with a gentle expression, "Zhou Qin, do you know what this battle means?" Although Zhou Qin had had a life-and-death battle with Yan Fang before, it had been a moment of life and death. If she didn't fight, she would die, so Zhou Qin had no choice. She had to fight desperately. In this case, she could stimulate all her potential. But now, it was very different. Zhou Qin could choose not to fight, so that Li Yundong could continue to compete for treasures. In this case, Zhou Qin felt that it was not right to accept the challenge, but it was also wrong not to. She couldn't help but whisper nervously, "I know. If I lose, Master, you will lose the right to seize the immortal pen." Hearing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. It was rare for him to show a very intimate attitude towards Zhou Qin in front of everyone. He reached out his hand and gently patted Zhou Qin on the shoulder. Then, he took her hand and said earnestly, "Zhou Qin, you are wrong. For me, the immortal pen is indeed a very powerful and important powerful magical weapon, but compared to you, it is worthless. There are as many powerful magical weapons in the world as there are hairs on an ox. Do I have to rob them all? As long as I have enough powerful magical weapons, and if I lose them, I can get them again in the future." Li Yundong looked at Zhou Qin gently, as if there was only him and Zhou Qin here. He said as if there was no one else around, "But if your cultivation falls into the devil's way here, there will be no turning back. So, for me, in this battle, what I am most concerned about is whether you can defeat your inner devil. As for the immortal pen, I don't care about it at all. Besides, no matter how precious a powerful magical weapon is, it is just a dead object. In this world, how can there be a reason to value a dead object more than a living person? Not to mention the immortal pen, even if all the powerful magical weapons in the world are piled here, they are not as important as you. Do you understand?" Li Yundong's words made everyone speechless for a while, especially the female cultivators of various sections. They all looked at Li Yundong with little stars in their eyes, and their eyes were full of love. Wei Qing put her hands together in front of her chest, like a praying girl. She said with infatuation, "Oh my God, it's so touching. Li Yundong is really a peerless saint. If I were Zhou Qin, it would be worth it even if I died in the next moment." Yu Sheng, who was standing to one side, rolled his eyes and snorted. "Is it that exaggerated? Are you still a cultivator? You've watched too many idol dramas, haven't you?" Wei Qing immediately rolled her eyes even more and said, "What do you know? Is there any woman in the world who doesn't want a man to value her? What's wrong with female cultivators? Aren't female cultivators women?" Although Zhang Ling and the others of the Zhengyi school had always had a grudge against Li Yundong, as female cultivators, they couldn't help but have a great change in their impression of Li Yundong after hearing his words. Zhang Ling couldn't help thinking in a daze, although Li Yundong has been against us again and again, he is also a sentimental person. Alas, if I had half the affection of Li Yundong, why would I have to spend the rest of my life alone? The little sister next to Zhou Ping couldn't help but tug at Zhou Ping's sleeve and whisper, "Shiji, Shiji. Li Yundong doesn't look like a bad person at all. How could a person who can be so good to his disciple in the world be a bad person?" When Zhou Ping heard Li Yundong's words, she suddenly felt sad and looked at Zhang Tianhe with extreme sadness. She thought to herself, if my little Shirdi, who is more ambitious than the sky, could say such words to me like Li Yundong, even if it was just one sentence, then I would really die without regrets. Zhou Ping sighed deeply and smiled bitterly. Little Shimmy, you don't understand. When you grow up a little, you will understand. Little junior sister blinked her eyes and nodded as if she understood. These female cultivators, who had nothing to do with them, were greatly moved when they heard this. Zhou Qin was even more excited when she heard it. In an instant, tears almost welled up in her eyes. At this moment, Zhou Qin only felt that her persistence and dedication seemed to have been rewarded. For a moment, she looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. This woman, who was usually strong and indifferent, looked at Li Yundong with great affection. Tears kept rolling in her eyes, as if in the next second, if Li Yundong asked her to jump off a cliff, she would jump down without hesitation. Ruan Hongling saw that Zhou Qin was so moved that she was about to cry in public. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart, you know that she likes you, but you still say such words to her. Alas, Li Yundong, how many people are you going to hurt? Is it really true that seeing Yundong will ruin your whole life? However, Li Yundong didn't seem to see the various gazes and reactions of the people around him. He smiled, reached out his hand, and wiped the tears from the corners of Zhou Qin's eyes with his broad and soft palm. He said with a smile, as the saying goes, fighting is like using troops, and there is a saying in the art of war, using troops to attack tactics. Attacking the opponent's heart, breaking their Taoist heart, and subduing them without fighting is the best way to fight. Zhou Qin, don't give up without fighting. Even if you lose, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is not to leave any regrets in your heart. If you lose something, you can get it back. If you lose in a fight, you can win it back. But once regrets are left, they can't be made up for. Zhou Qin only felt that Li Yundong's palm was warm and soft. When his skin touched the corner of her eye, she even trembled slightly as if she had been electrocuted. His words made a warm power surge in her heart. This power quickly poured into her limbs and internal organs, making her feel as if she had endless strength. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong deeply and suddenly smiled brightly. She nodded hard and said, Master, I know. I won't let you down. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, I will never be disappointed in you. After that, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. Zi Yuan, who had been watching Li Yundong with a complicated gaze, saw Zhou Qin take a deep breath and slowly close her eyes. She knew that Zhou Qin was going to make the final adjustment and prepare to go on stage, so she whispered, Lu Yuqing's cultivation is not trivial. Zhou Qin, you fight with him. Remember not to let him set the rules of the fight. Also, try to compete with him in fist and foot skills, or with powerful magical weapons. Don't compete with him in magic, otherwise you will have no chance of winning. Li Yundong also nodded in agreement and said, Yes, Zhou Qin, the space in the cabin is narrow, so it is more suitable for fighting with fists and feet. Later, you should try your best to fight him in close combat and narrow the huge gap between your cultivation and magic. In terms of magic, even 10 of you are no match for him. In terms of fists and feet, you and he are on the same starting line. After the two of them finished speaking, Zhou Qin slowly exhaled at this time. This breath shot out like a straight arrow until the couplets hanging on the cabin hit the wall and scattered in all directions, causing the pages of the couplets to rustle. Zhou Qin opened her eyes. She no longer looked back at Li Yundong or Zi Yuan. She just stared at Lu Yuqing, as if everyone in the world around her had disappeared, leaving only Lu Yuqing and herself. Zhou Qin took a step forward calmly. She cupped her hands and said in a sonorous voice, I am Zhou Qin, the first disciple of Li Yundong. Jinren Lu, please enlighten me. Although the second chapter on the 8th is a little late, please forgive me for the sake of the fact that both chapters are really big chapters of 4,000 words tofu. Vote recommendation previous page return to table of contents next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 486. Go to Watch Net. Lu Yuqing hadn't expected that Li Yundong would support Zhou Qin so strongly in public. He hadn't expected that when Zhou Qin opened her eyes again, there would be no fear or worry in them at all. At this time, Zhou Qin had entered a state of selflessness. In her eyes, there was no one else but himself. Go to Watch Net. Lu Yuqing sneered secretly and was very disdainful of Zhou Qin's overconfidence. He thought mockingly, a serious sheep is just a sheep. Does she really expect to beat me? She's just a little girl. If I fight with her, others will laugh at me for bullying her. Lu Yuqing snorted coldly, turned his head to Li Yundong, and said, Jinrenli, if you send your disciple out, I'll also send my disciple out to pick her up. Otherwise, people will say that I'm bullying the weak. When the cultivators of the other sects heard this, they laughed in their hearts at the same time and thought to themselves, Lu Yuqing is not stupid. He knows that fighting with this girl will be unfair and humiliating. Sending his favorite disciple was the best choice. No matter what, his disciple's cultivation skills were better than this girl named Zhou Qin's. After hearing Lu Yuqing's words, Li Yundong smiled slightly and cupped his hands. Jinren Lu, I have no objection, but I don't know if your disciples have any objections? Aren't they afraid that if they lose the competition, they will lose the qualification to continue participating in the competition? As soon as this was said, everyone immediately cheered in their hearts. Su Chan even laughed and said, Wonderful. Yundong is really smart and powerful. This is called giving him a taste of his own medicine. Lu Yuqing wants to break Sister Zhou Qin's Taoist heart, so Yundong will break the Taoist heart of his disciple. Let's see what he can do. Sure enough, Lu Yuqing's face changed greatly. He looked at Li Yundong unkindly and said in a deep voice, Jinrenli, what do you mean? How could my disciple be inferior to your disciple? Li Yundong chuckled and said, Then you have to ask them. Lu Yuqing turned his head to look at his disciple and shouted with a straight face, Who dares to fight? The disciples of their sect saw that Zhou Qin was extremely beautiful. Standing in the field, she was slender and elegant, with an outstanding heroic bearing. As the saying goes, a graceful lady is a good match for a gentleman. Zhou Qin's beauty naturally attracted the admiration of these young male cultivators. A rather handsome young man stepped forward and said, Master, I'm willing to fight for you. Only then did Lu Yuqing's face look a little better. He nodded slightly and said, Well, you can be considered a cultivator who has cultivated to the Yangshan phase. I'll feel more at ease if you fight. When the young and handsome male disciple heard this, he was overjoyed. He turned his head and put on what he thought was his most handsome pose. He grinned and said, Jinren Zhou, please. Unexpectedly, Zhou Qin's eyes moved and looked at the male disciple like lightning. Zhou Qin's character was originally firm and strong, and her aura was strong and powerful. In addition, she had polished her aura and character all the way in the Himalayas to be as strong as steel. At this time, when she glared at him, her momentum was really extraordinary. Zhou Qin stared at him and said coldly, Aren't you afraid of death? The young and handsome man felt as if he had been stared at by a ferocious beast. His whole body trembled, and there was a burst of panic in his heart for no reason. For a moment, he couldn't speak. When Zhou Qin saw a trace of fear in the man's eyes, she immediately sneered disdainfully and said, Jinren Lu, it seems that your disciple is not very good. Lu Yuqing suddenly became furious and shouted at him, You good for nothing. Are you scared out of your wits with just one sentence? The young male disciple's face turned red and he lowered his head, not daring to retort. Zhou Qin looked back and said coldly, Jinren Lu, I think you'd better do it yourself. Don't waste everyone's time. Lu Yuqing's face was ugly. He gritted his teeth and sneered, "I've never seen such an arrogant junior like you. Well, since you insist on courting death, I'll fulfill your wish." Zhou Qin didn't get angry. She calmly adjusted her breathing and tried to adjust her body to the best state. She said lightly, "Zhenren Lu, since you are older than me and have cultivated longer than me, we won't compete in magic. Otherwise, others will say that you are bullying the weak. How about we compete with our fists and feet?" Lu Yuqing saw that Zhou Qin's words were obviously taking advantage of him and was still pretending to be obedient. He was so angry that he laughed and said, "Compete with fists and feet? Humph, how dare you compete with me in fists and feet? Do you know what kind of kung fu I've learned?" Zhou Qin said coldly, "I don't know. I just want to know, you've been talking for a long time. Are you going to fight or not?" Lu Yuqing laughed angrily and said, well, come on, let me see what kind of amazing fists and feet you've learned." After that, he crossed his arms and lifted them from the bottom to the top. When he raised them to his chest, he suddenly shouted loudly. His whole body shook, and a stream of zhenqi burst out from inside. The clothes on his body made a crisp sound, and the corners of his clothes fluttered without any wind. Lu Yuqing frowned and glared. He flicked his sleeves, and as soon as his sleeves touched the edge of the table next to him, there was a sudden snap, as if a sharp sword had cut a hole in the hard mahogany leg. As the saying goes, medicine carries the Tao, and martial arts defend the Tao. 9 out of 10 Taoists practiced martial arts. The cultivators in the cabin were also knowledgeable about fists and feet. They were suddenly shocked, and some cultivators couldn't help whispering, "What a strong force." Lu Yuqing flicked his sleeves and immediately showed an extremely powerful and fierce kung fu. Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, and the others all gasped when they saw this. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but ask Zi Yuan, "Sister Zi Yuan, what kind of kung fu is this?" Zi Yuan saw that Lu Yuqing was standing alone like a golden rooster. One of his hands was clenched into a fist and the other was stretched out behind him. Although he was standing on one leg, he was as stable as a pine tree, and there was a deadly killing move hidden in his posture. Zi Yuan was slightly shocked and whispered, "Oh no, this seems to be the Baji fist." Ruan Hongling was shocked. "Ah, the Baji fist? Isn't Zhou Qin in danger?" Zi Yuan's face was solemn as she quickly glanced at Li Yunyang. She shook her head at Ruan Hongling and didn't say anything else, but her expression was full of worry. There were also young cultivators in the cabin who had just entered the sect and had followed their seniors to participate in the Taoist assembly to watch the fun. Seeing Lu Yuqing's strange posture, they couldn't help asking, "What kind of fist technique is this? It looks so strange." An older cultivator who knew the ropes explained, "This is the Baji fist." "The Baji fist? Is it the Baji fist that Emperor Kangxi personally nominated? Tai Chi can bring peace to the world, and the 8 levels of martial arts can determine the universe?" Exactly. The Baji fist is known as the supreme of external boxing. TSK, it seems that Zhou Qin is in danger. I didn't expect Lu Yuqing of the Shinshao sect to know the Baji fist. I thought he was practicing internal boxing. Aren't Buddhist fist techniques the majority of the external martial arts? That's not true. Ding Faxiang, who made the Baji fist famous all over the world, is a disciple of our Taoist sect. The person who taught him Kung Fu is Zhenren Huangju, who is known as the Slovenly Taoist. I don't know what Zhou Qin can do. Can she beat Lu Yuqing? While everyone was talking about it, Lu Yuqing suddenly glared at Zhou Qin and shouted, "Come on." After that, he moved forward. However, Zhou Qin suddenly raised her palm and said, "Wait a minute." Lu Yuqing forcibly withdrew his strength and said unhappily, "What else do you want to say?" Zhou Qin said, "Since we are fighting to the death, we naturally don't have to be responsible for killing or injuring each other, right?" Lu Yuqing sneered and said, "Of course. Little girl, if you are afraid, it's not too late to retreat now. You haven't cultivated to the level where your Yin spirit can travel. If you die, you will die like a lamp going out, and there will be nothing you can do. Zhou Qin smiled slightly, as if she hadn't heard Lu Yuqing's words. She said, then I see. Let's get started. Lu Yuqing took a deep breath and was about to step forward again, but as soon as he moved, he heard Zhou Qin say, wait. Lu Yuqing's qi had just gushed out like a flood from a sluice gate, but he had to immediately retract it. He was very depressed and shouted impatiently, what do you want? Zhou Qin smiled and said, there are still some things we need to make clear first. Lu Yuqing said angrily, what is it? Can't you say it all at once? Zhou Qin smiled and said, didn't you talk for a long time before? Why are you getting impatient all of a sudden? Lu Yuqing only felt that as a senior of the Shinshao sect, he was actually entangled with a junior here. He didn't know where to use all his strength, and a wave of anger rushed to the top of his head. He said angrily, times have changed. How can it be the same? What on earth do you want? Tell me quickly. Zhou Qin smiled and said, I want to say that no matter who wins or loses, who lives or who dies, we can't continue to pursue this matter. What do you think? Lu Yuqing said angrily, nonsense. Do you still want to fight or not? Zhou Qin calmed down and stood upright. She said, come on. Lu Yuqing snorted angrily and set up his posture again. Just as he was about to use all his strength, he heard Zhou Qin shout again, wait. At this time, the people on the sidelines couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. Lu Yuqing flew into a rage and said, why do you have so many tricks up your sleeve? If you don't want to fight, get out of here. Zhou Qin was not angry. She smiled slightly and said, I have to say something to my master. After that, she ignored Lu Yuqing and walked over to Li Yundong's table. When Li Yunyang saw Zhou Qin coming over, he took advantage of the cover of his body and quietly gave her a thumbs up. He laughed and said in a low voice, not bad. Lu Yuqing has already been provoked by you to be impatient. She will be exhausted in the end. Zi Yuan also warned in a low voice, Zhou Qin, remember to overcome strength with softness later. Don't fight Lu Yuqing head-on. He practices the Baji fist. This kind of fist technique is fierce and explosive. It's very terrifying. Zhou Qin nodded to show that she had heard it. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, then turned her head and walked back to the field. At this time, Lu Yuqing was already extremely impatient. In his heart, even if a beautiful and delicate girl like Zhou Qin knew Kung Fu, it was just a fancy move, not worth mentioning at all. As soon as she touched his Baji boxing, she would definitely be defeated. Zhou Qin moved her wrists and ankles on the spot and said to Lu Yuqing, Zhenren Lu, are you ready? At this time, Lu Yuqing was too lazy to put on a posture. He looked at Zhou Qin impatiently and said, I've been ready for a long time. But are you ready? Zhou Qin smiled slightly. Her right foot was slightly in front of her, and her body leaned forward a little. Her back was slightly raised, and she said, I'm ready. Lu Yuqing waved at Zhou Qin. Then come on. Zhou Qin took a deep breath and said slowly, well, okay. After that, her eyes suddenly opened, and all the strength in her body exploded like a high explosive. Zhou Qin's right foot suddenly stepped down, and with a bang, the yacht was obviously tilted. With this force, her body rushed toward Lu Yuqing like a cannonball. The people on the sidelines only felt a strong wind blowing in their faces, as if a fierce tiger had suddenly jumped down a mountain stream with unstoppable force. Lu Yuqing was shocked. He hadn't expected that Zhou Qin's sudden attack would be so powerful. In the blink of an eye, she had already rushed in front of him. If it had been an ordinary person, they might have been in a hurry at this time and been caught off guard by Zhou Qin. However, Lu Yuqing's Baji boxing was a kung fu that could be used for long-range and short-range attacks. The name of the Baji boxing was exactly the meaning of level 8, can reach extremely far places in all directions. Lu Yuqing shouted loudly, "Come on." He tilted his body slightly, one hand behind him, and his 5 fingers closed like a bird's beak. The other hand was in front of him, and he slapped down on Zhou Qin's head. This was the turning back palm Chaoyang hand of the Baji boxing. Lu Yuqing's punch was like a strong man waving an iron hammer, smashing toward the top of Zhou Qin's head. If it hit, Zhou Qin's brain would burst and she would die on the spot. However, Zhou Qin didn't dodge. Her eyes widened, and with a loud shout, she punched hard at Lu Yuqing's throat. This was exactly the move that she had learned from Li Yundong when he had fought with Huang Yifei at school. Go straight, attack the enemy with the momentum of a thunderbolt. When everyone saw that Zhou Qin and Lu Yuqing were about to fight to the death, they were all shocked. They stood up and looked at the field with their eyes wide open. One was an old and experienced cultivation senior, and the other was a beautiful and young cultivation rookie. Who would win in a life and death battle? Chapter 487. Go to watch net. Zhou Qin's punch was like the roar of a cannon. As soon as it was thrown out, the surrounding air seemed to be squeezed open. Like a thunderbolt, it rushed in front of Lu Yuqing in the blink of an eye. Go to watch net. 7 K.O.M. Lu Yuqing was slightly startled. He had not expected that such a beautiful woman would actually fight with her life on the line. Although Lu Yuqing was surprised, he had practiced kung fu for many years and had reached the realm of releasing his strength as he wished. With a thought, he withdrew his palm that was about to hit Zhou Qin's head, and his body floated away like a ghost. Zhou Qin's fist hit nothing but air. Zhou Qin's punch missed, and then she felt a strong wind coming from her waist and abdomen. It was Lu Yuqing who had turned around and touched Zhou Qin's waist and abdomen with a backhand palm. This palm didn't seem to be as fierce as the turning body flip palm or the rising sun palm from before, but the force of this palm was soft and gentle. Furthermore, it was aimed at the vital parts of a person's waist and abdomen. As long as the position of the kidney was touched, the force would immediately drill into the body and cause great damage to the kidney. Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and twisted her slender waist hard. Her whole body seemed to be twisted into a fried dough twist. She raised her hand to the side of her body, trying to push away Lu Yuqing's hand that was touching her waist. Her other hand clenched into a fist and hit Lu Yuqing's chest with a whoosh. Lu Yuqing sneered. As soon as his hand touched Zhou Qin's, he immediately turned his wrist and his arm drilled toward Zhou Qin's waist and abdomen like a loach. His fingertips quickly wiped Zhou Qin's waist. This was the horse palm of the Vajra 8 styles of Bajiquan. Zhou Qin felt that as soon as the other party's fingertips touched her body, an extremely cold aura drilled into her body. She felt as if she had been hit by an electric current, and half of her body was numb. If it had been someone else, they would have directly lost the ability to resist. However, when Zhou Qin climbed Carry Holy Mountain, she had climbed with bare hands in the ice and snow. She had been able to persist in the extremely cold conditions. How could she not bear it at this time? Zhou Qin suffered a great loss as soon as she fought with Lu Yuqing, but she gritted her teeth fiercely. Like an injured tiger, a strong force burst out from her body. She took a step forward and got into Lu Yuqing's arms. She raised her arm and hit Lu Yuqing's heart with her elbow. She also lifted her knee and kicked toward Lu Yuqing's lower body. Lu Yuqing was shocked. He hadn't expected that Zhou Qin would not retreat after being hit by his palm. Instead, she would suddenly come to him like a madman and fight hand-to-hand with him. Close combat was about momentum. Lu Yuqing was proud of his profound kung fu, and he was only a senior. There was no reason for him to retreat in front of a young man, especially a young and beautiful woman. Without thinking, he immediately used his elbow to meet Zhou Qin's arm. At the same time, he also raised his knee and hit Zhou Qin's knee. Everyone saw Zhou Qin and Lu Yuqing's elbow and knee collide with each other, making 2 dull sounds, as if someone was hammering a sandbag with an iron hammer. As soon as Lu Yuqing and Zhou Qin collided fiercely, he suddenly felt that her bones were as hard as steel. Although his cultivation was high, he was not a master of the Jinshan phase after all. After all, the flesh was flesh. This collision only made his elbows and knees feel like they were being torn apart. However, Lu Yuqing saw that Zhou Qin didn't seem to feel any pain at all. Her face was as hard as iron, and the muscles of her cheeks were twisted together like steel bars. She gritted her teeth and elbowed his head again. Lu Yuqing didn't believe that Zhou Qin's elbows and knees would not be injured at all, so he elbowed Zhou Qin's elbow again. This time, the elbow joints of the two people collided heavily, making a crisp sound, which made everyone's hair stand on end. Su Chan was also a good fighter, especially proficient in the joints and bones of the human body. When she heard the sound, she couldn't help shivering and said with a pale face, "Oh no, the bones are broken." "I don't know whose bones are broken." Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling didn't seem to hear her. They all stared at the field nervously, not daring to blink, for fear that the outcome would be decided if they blinked. Lu Yuqing and Zhou Qin fought hard. He only felt as if his elbow had been hit by an iron hammer, and the pain made him black out. But before he could react, he saw Zhou Qin hit him in the face with another hammer. Seeing this, Lu Yuqing was shocked and angry. This girl is too much. How can she hit me so unreasonably? What kind of messy moves are these? No one had expected that this beautiful and cold Zhou Qin would use a street hooligan-like move like a headbutt. Moreover, she had the momentum of cutting off all means of retreat and sinking the boat. This headbutt came without warning and was fierce and fierce. Lu Yuqing knew that he only had two choices. He could either choose to fight hard or choose to dodge. There was absolutely no third way. After all, Lu Yuqing was old and experienced. He knew that when they met on a narrow road, the brave would win. Whoever dodged first would be at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. When young people fought, their momentum was often the strongest in the first few moves. As long as he could withstand it, Zhou Qin's momentum would definitely decline, and he could win the battle. Lu Yuqing thought quickly. When he thought of this, he immediately used his qi to meet Zhou Qin's headbutt. With a muffled bang, the foreheads of the two people collided firmly. When everyone heard this sound, their hearts suddenly trembled. Many cultivators subconsciously touched their foreheads, as if they were also in extreme pain. Lu Yuqing was hit by Zhou Qin's headbutt, and his body actually leaned back. He felt a burning sensation on his forehead. Lu Yuqing knew that he must have been injured. Lu Yuqing was shocked and angry. This girl actually injured me? When he took a closer look, he saw that Zhou Qin, who was opposite him, had also leaned back. Her forehead was also dark red, and her face was covered with blood. But at this time, Zhou Qin abruptly stopped leaning back. She gritted her teeth and, regardless of the blood on her face, punched Lu Yuqing in the face again. Lu Yuqing was furious. He gritted his teeth and punched Zhou Qin's fist again. When their fists collided, there was another crisp crack, which made a terrible sound like an iron hammer smashing a bean. Lu Yuqing fought head-on several times in a row, and the pain made his whole body tremble uncontrollably. But Zhou Qin, who was opposite him, seemed to have become an unconscious monster. Her hair was disheveled, and her face was covered with blood. She was extremely ferocious as she headbutted Lu Yuqing again. Everyone looked at Zhou Qin in the field and felt their hair stand on end. They couldn't believe their eyes. How could such a beautiful woman be so fierce and desperate? Is she crazy? Some people couldn't help but look at Li Yundong and secretly speculated, could it be because of what Li Yundong said just now that Zhou Qin was so desperate? However, Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on the field. His face was calm, and there was no emotion to be seen. Only he knew that this was Zhou Qin's character in true colors. She would rather break than bend, and if she couldn't win, she would die. This girl was still calm and collected in the face of a gun. She dared to fight to the death on a tall building. Even in the midst of despair, she did not hesitate to jump from a tall building. She would rather destroy herself than surrender. This seemingly weak girl's body hid an extremely terrifying power. It could destroy all of her enemies, and it could also destroy herself. Lu Yuqing saw Zhou Qin smashing her head over again. At this time, this beautiful woman had completely transformed into a ferocious and extremely fierce Banda lamb. Anyone who was her enemy would be dragged into the bloody abyss by her and perish together with her. Zhou Qin's madness was far beyond Lu Yuqing's expectations and imagination. In the face of another fierce attack from Zhou Qin, he finally hesitated and became timid. He took a step back and finally chose not to fight head-on. Instead, he chose to avoid the sharp edge. Lu Yuqing thought to himself, it's impossible for Zhou Qin to maintain such a fierce attack forever. As long as she can hold on, she will collapse by herself. But as soon as he chose to retreat, an old cultivator sighed in a low voice and shook his head. It's over. The opportunity has been lost. It's impossible for Lu Yuqing to make a comeback. From now on, there will be no Zhenren Lu Yuqing in the cultivation world. A young cultivator who didn't understand asked in a low voice, why is that? Zhou Qin's madness won't last long. As long as we avoid it and wait for her to be tired, we can fight back and win, right? The older cultivator said earnestly, that's not right. Haven't you heard of the saying that fists are afraid of the young, and sticks are afraid of the old? If the two of them compete in weapons, then it depends on who is more skilled in kung fu. In that case, Lu Yuqing will definitely win. But when it comes to fighting with fists, courage, internal energy, and endurance will be tested. Although the time they fought just now was short, it consumed a lot of physical strength. These few fights are even more tiring than your 3 consecutive fights. Although Zhou Qin is a woman, her aura is extremely strong, and at this time, her momentum is full. It can be said that she is in her peak state. Moreover, she is so young, so her endurance must be better than Lu Yuqing's. If Lu Yuqing wants to fight with Zhou Qin, he may not be able to outlast her. What's more, the first rule of Baji Fist is that people's hearts are upright, and the next is that people who practice martial arts must be courageous. Strength and skills are secondary. Lu Yuqing learned Baji Fist by himself. If he loses his courage, his kung fu will be reduced by at least half. How can he win? The young cultivators were still a little disapproving when they heard this, but soon the change in the situation on the field convinced them. At this time, as soon as Zhou Qin saw that Lu Yuqing had chosen to retreat, her attacks became more and more crazy. She pushed, hammered, entangled, kicked, burst, bit, and smashed. All of them were heavy blows, and all of them were fighting with their lives. Lu Yuqing had lost his momentum and didn't dare to fight Zhou Qin head-on anymore. Every time he wanted to dodge, he thought that Zhou Qin would be exhausted. However, not only was Zhou Qin not exhausted, but she was even more fierce and powerful than the last. Lu Yuqing was beaten back again and again, but after all, he was strong. Although he was retreating, his feet were not in disorder at all. After dodging for a while, he saw that Zhou Qin's attacks were like a storm, and there was no sign of them stopping. Instead, he was a little out of breath. Lu Yuqing was anxious. He knew that if he continued to waste time like this, it was very likely that he would be exhausted to death by Zhou Qin here. He calmed himself down. When he saw Zhou Qin's punch coming, he suddenly turned around and ran back. Without thinking about it, Zhou Qin immediately stepped forward to chase after him. But as soon as she caught up with him, she saw Lu Yuqing suddenly turn around and sweep his elbow, like a powerful and strong knife-dragging chop. This move was sudden and unexpected. It was the knife-dragging skill taken from the battlefield. In the past, Guan Yu, the warrior sage, had relied on this move to kill countless ghosts. Those who knew what it was immediately cheered loudly. But as soon as their voices came out, they saw Zhou Qin's body suddenly lean forward quickly. It seemed that because she had rushed too fast before, she could not control her momentum, so she simply leaned forward to avoid Lu Yuqing's unique skill. But as she dodged, the back of her head and her entire back were exposed to Lu Yuqing. Lu Yuqing's elbow swept across Zhou Qin's back. Seeing that Zhou Qin had revealed such a big flaw, he was overjoyed. He raised his hand and smashed the back of Zhou Qin's head with a hammer. But as soon as he raised his hand, Zhou Qin suddenly turned over and kicked out from behind her head. Like a scorpion wagging its tail, she pounced on Lu Yuqing's face like lightning and thunder. Lu Yuqing hadn't expected that Zhou Qin, who had always fought in a rough and simple way, would use such a subtle move. He didn't even have time to react before Zhou Qin kicked him in the face. Lu Yuqing only felt a pain in his face and almost fainted. He immediately closed his eyes and retreated. His hands were like two closed doors in front of him, waiting for Zhou Qin to break in. As expected, Zhou Qin immediately chased after him without hesitation. She slapped Lu Yuqing's ear mercilessly, but Lu Yuqing was experienced. His hands stretched out like poisonous snakes and touched Zhou Qin's neck in an instant. As long as he exerted force, Zhou Qin's delicate neck would be broken by Lu Yuqing. But just as Lu Yuqing grabbed Zhou Qin's neck, he also felt that Zhou Qin's fingers had touched his eyelids at the same time. A chill went straight to the back of his head, as if Zhou Qin's two slender fingers would penetrate his eye sockets and pierce straight into his brain in the next second. Although Lu Yuqing also held Zhou Qin's life in his hands, he did not feel that Zhou Qin had the slightest intention of giving up. He had no doubt that if he broke her neck, this woman would definitely pierce his eye sockets with her fingers before he broke her neck. She would die with him. Was it worth it to give up his life for a fight? At this moment, Lu Yuqing even forgot that he was a young spirit master. Zhou Qin's crazy and terrible way of fighting had completely destroyed his will to resist. Without thinking about it, Lu Yuqing immediately let go of Zhou Qin's neck and shouted in horror, "Stop, I admit defeat, I admit defeat." At this time, he felt Zhou Qin's fingertips stop on his eyelids, as if the muzzle of a gun was against his forehead. It was cold. Zhou Qin maintained the posture of two dragons fighting for a pearl. Her two fingers were like strong steel hooks. Her hair was disheveled and her face was covered in blood. She gritted her teeth and said fiercely, "Do you really admit defeat?" Lu Yuqing nodded without hesitation. "I admit defeat." At this time, the ferocious expression on Zhou Qin's face slowly faded. She withdrew her hand and let out a long breath. Her eyes swept around sharply and she said loudly, "My master is not a great grandmaster today, but he will definitely be one in the future. Who else dares to question my identity as the first disciple of the sect? Come out and speak." Only then did everyone understand that Zhou Qin was so fierce and desperate just to seek justice for Li Yundong and herself. However, for the sake of justice, for the sake of a few words of contempt, was it worth it to risk his life so fiercely? For a moment, all the cultivators in the cabin looked at Zhou Qin in a daze. No one answered her, and no one took a step forward. Zhou Qin stood proudly in the field, looking down at the crowd and shouting 3 times in a row. Seeing that no one responded, she slowly walked toward Li Yundong. Zhou Qin walked to Li Yundong's side, and her ferocious face suddenly became gentle and affectionate. She broke into a smile and said softly, "Master, I didn't embarrass you, did I?" Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on Zhou Qin, and his heart was filled with mixed feelings. He nodded slowly and said, "No, you are very good, very good." Zhou Qin smiled brightly. Everyone felt that the fierce aura of this woman had disappeared. In an instant, the blood-stained steel knife had turned into a blood-stained peony. Her beauty was sad, and her appearance was peerless. After Zhou Qin smiled, her body suddenly tilted and fell softly toward Li Yundong. Only then did everyone know that Zhou Qin was already an arrow at the end of its flight. She had held on until now with one breath. The cultivators of all sects sighed. Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect shook his head and sighed. After this battle, all the cultivators in the world will know Zhou Qin's reputation for being iron-blooded and brave. They will all know that Li Yundong has such a disciple who can't be easily taught. From now on, no one will dare to look down on Li Yundong, and no one will dare to look down on Zhou Qin, a cultivator who has just entered the sect. Chapter 488. Go to watch net. He took 2 steps forward and hugged her. He mobilized his Jinqi to scan her body and was shocked. The qi in her body was in a mess, and the bones in her elbows, knees, and fists were broken beyond recognition. Li Yundong took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes, and gave Lu Yuqing an unfriendly look. He saw that Lu Yuqing was standing there in a daze. Ever since he had said that he would admit defeat, she had lost her spirit. He had been standing there like a walking corpse, motionless, as if he was extremely regretful. Why didn't I persist a little longer? Li Yunyang knew that Lu Yuqing's Taoist heart had been broken. From now on, his cultivation was over. The anger in his heart dissipated a lot. He sighed slightly and gently wiped the blood from her face with his hand. Does it hurt? Zhou Qin forced a smile. The sharp pain in her body made her unable to speak for a while. At this time, the qi in her body was still very strong, but her body was too seriously injured. Especially after the fierce head-on collision, her bones had been severely damaged. Watch net. Seeing this, Ziyuan hurriedly stepped forward and reached out to take the pulse on Zhou Qin's wrist. She took a breath, and the nervous expression on her face suddenly relaxed a lot. She let out a breath and said softly, "Fortunately, there is no danger to her life. It's just that many of her bones are broken." After that, Ziyuan asked Zhou Qin in a low voice, "How do you feel?" Zhou Qin's lips trembled as she forced a smile and said, "I'm okay, just a little dizzy." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Fool, if you hit him with your head like that, it would be strange if you didn't faint." He turned around and said to Su Chan, who was looking at Zhou Qin with concern, "Chaner, will you take Zhou Qin to see a doctor?" Before Su Chan could speak, she saw Zhou Qin struggling to stand up. She rushed to shout, "No!" Her shout immediately affected her injuries, and she almost fainted from the pain. Li Yundong quickly pressed her shoulder and said, "Don't move. What else do you want to do with your injuries?" Zhou Qin grabbed Li Yunyang's clothes tightly with one hand and said with a pleading face, "Master, don't let me leave. I'm fine. Let me watch from the side, okay?" Li Yundong glanced at Ziyuan with a wry smile, wanting to ask for her opinion. Ziyuan knew that Zhou Qin was born stubborn. She sighed softly and nodded slightly. "It's okay. Let her stay here. Her internal organs are not injured, and her meridians are not damaged. As long as she doesn't exercise strenuously, it will be fine." Li Yundong sighed and helplessly helped Zhou Qin to the side of the table. He let Su Chan hold her gently and said, "Well, I can't do anything to you. Just watch from the side." Zhou Qin's face lit up with joy and she stopped talking. She looked at Li Yundong quietly from the side. She sat like a peony, quiet and beautiful, making it impossible for people to associate the fierce madman just now with her. When everyone saw Li Yundong and Zhou Qin talking as if there was no one else around, they were all shocked by Zhou Qin's ferocity. For a moment, they didn't say anything to provoke them. Even Wang Jinyuan looked at Zhou Qin in surprise and thought, Li Yundong has such a disciple. This is really like adding wings to a tiger. In time, Zhou Qin will definitely become a great person. Why don't I have such a disciple? Damn it. Thinking of this, Wang Jinyuan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, "Jinrenli, your Fox Zen school has won 3 games in a row. Do you want to continue?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "Of course. I wonder which fellow Taoist would like to give me some advice." The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other for a moment. They were still immersed in the strong shock and impact that Zhou Qin had brought them, and some of them couldn't come to their senses. Moreover, Li Yundong had rested for a while, so at this time, he was already full of breath and spirit. If they went on stage again, wouldn't it be like helping others? The cultivators of the various sects turned their heads to look at the few people who were recognized as the strongest in the field and had a grudge against Li Yundong at the same time. But at this time, Zhang Tianhe of the Zhengyi school looked down at the ground, as if there was a flower growing there. Wang Lingfei looked down at his slender and delicate hands, as if he was admiring a peerless treasure. Yu Xing of the Chuanjin dragon sect closed his eyes, as if he had fallen asleep. Zhang Cuni, who had said that he would win first place, was drinking tea slowly, as if he was on vacation. For a moment, everyone cursed in their hearts, damn it, he was so arrogant at first, but now he's scared? Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Xing, and Zhang Cuni seemed to know what everyone was thinking. They looked at each other at the same time, and then they went back to their own things, looking at the floor and drinking tea. Seeing that there was going to be an awkward silence, Wan Zhenyuan laughed again and said, "Zhenrenli, congratulations on accepting a good disciple. Unfortunately, there is only one. If there is another such good disciple, I'm afraid the Taoist assembly will no longer be held. I'll just give you the prize directly, aha." Wan Zhenyuan spoke in a heroic manner, and his words were full of praise for Li Yundong. But only Zhou Qin and other scheming people knew that Wan Zhenyuan's words had no good intentions. His subtext was to tell everyone that Li Yundong only had one disciple who could fight, and now he was useless and couldn't go on stage again. As long as everyone took turns to fight, Li Yundong wouldn't be able to withstand it even if he was made of iron or a bronze luohan. Zhou Qin looked at Wan Zhenyuan deeply and thought, this Master Wan has always been hiding needles in his words and secretly stirring up trouble. What does he want to do? Is he trying to balance the situation, or is he specifically targeting Master? If he is trying to balance the situation, then he must want to use the immortal pen to weaken the strength of the cultivators of various sections. If he is targeting Master, then... For a moment, Zhou Qin was so lost in her thoughts that she forgot the pain in her body. She could understand this problem, and most of the cultivators present were not stupid. They could more or less understand this. Therefore, when Wan Zhenyuan said this, there was still silence. Everyone just laughed, but no one stepped forward. Seeing this, Wan Zhenyuan sighed and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. "Zhenrenli, I admire you. Ever since Zhenren Luo Gongyuan and Zhenren Yi Fashion established the Taoist assembly in the Tianbao years, there has never been a young cultivator like you who has won first place in the world. Today, you've created a new record." After that, he waved to his subordinates and shouted, "Bring me the immortal pen." When the crowd heard this, they immediately pricked up their ears. What? Li Yundong won just like that? Deng Cheng, who had been joking, shouted in surprise, "The Taoist assembly is over. It can't be." The last one took 3 days and 3 nights to decide the winner. Wan Zhenyuan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said to the crowd with a smile, "Zhenren Li's magical power is amazing, and he is good at fighting. He also has a good disciple. No one is willing to go forward to fight with him, so he naturally won. Zhenren Li is really a young hero. I admire you, really admire you. From the looks of it, from today onwards, you will be the #1 young cultivator in the world." When everyone heard this, their hearts suddenly surged. It's one thing to go on the stage or not, but it's absolutely impossible for the Taoist assembly to end like this and let Li Yundong take away the immortal pen so easily. Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Xing, and Zhang Cuni, who had originally stayed out of the matter, suddenly opened their eyes wide. As if they had a tacit understanding, they stood up and shouted at the same time, "I'll do it." Everyone was shocked, and then they all became excited. Well, either none of us go on the stage, or all of us go on the stage together. Well, these 4 are the best of the younger generation in the cultivation world. If they go on the stage, they should be able to suppress Li Yundong. Zhengyi school was determined to re-establish its position as the hegemon of the cultivation world, so they were very unwilling to see a powerful cultivator lead a crooked path to win the first prize of the Taoist assembly. The other sects were even more unwilling to see a notorious sect suddenly rise, because it indirectly affected their interests. Why can the Fox Zen school shine so brightly? What right do they have to suppress us? People fight for their dignity, and Buddhas fight for their incense. No one would think that they were inferior to others, especially cultivators. Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Sheng, and Zhang Cuni stood up at the same time and spoke at the same time. They were also stunned and looked at each other. Then they snorted and turned their faces away, looking down on each other. Seeing that he had finally provoked these four people, Wang Jinyuan was overjoyed. He smiled and said to them, "Well, you are indeed the descendants of a famous family. You have courage. I just don't know which Shinran will go on stage first." Zhang Tianhe and the other three looked at each other. There was a hint of wariness in their eyes, but they all remained silent. Wang Jinyuan had an idea and said, "How about drawing lots?" When everyone heard this, they were immediately happy and said with a smile, "Master Wan, that's a good idea. Let's do it this way." These cultivators didn't want to go on stage anyway, so they followed suit and made a ruckus. Zhang Tianhe and the others were a little embarrassed and froze on the spot. As a Sichuan native, Zhang Cuni had always had the character of, "I am the best in the world." He was the first to say loudly, "Okay, Master Wan, let's do it this way." As soon as he spoke, the other three had to speak up. Wang Jinyuan was overjoyed and immediately asked someone to bring him a ball of paper. After he finished writing, he asked someone to bring an airtight jar and threw the note into it. He said with a smile, "You four, please. Don't use your magic, or it will be regarded as cheating and you will be disqualified." Zhang Tianhe was a gentle person. He smiled slightly and did not speak. He took the lead and reached into the jar to find a note. He opened it and saw that there was no word on it. Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, "Congratulations, Jinren Zhang." Zhang Tianhe drew a blank piece of paper and breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. But as soon as he let out a sigh of relief, he suddenly became vigilant. Why did I feel like I had been pardoned when I didn't draw the first piece of paper? Am I really afraid of Li Yunyang? Zhang Tianhe's face darkened for a moment and he shouted in his heart, "No, this is impossible. I am stronger than him, much stronger than him." Zhang Cuni of the Qingqing sect then came to draw the note. He looked strangely at Zhang Tianhe, who was standing to one side, but he didn't think too much about it. He reached out and also drew a piece of paper. Everyone saw that both of them had drawn a piece of paper, so the next person to go on stage would either be Yu Sheng or Wang Lingfei. Wang Lingfei narrowed his eyes slightly and said to Yu Sheng, "Jinren Yu, you go first." Yu Sheng snorted and said, "It's just a 50% chance. Let's fight. What's there to be afraid of?" After that, he stopped touching the note and said loudly, "I'll go this time." Everyone immediately cheered, "Good job, Jinren Yu." Li Yunyang smiled slightly and cupped his hands to Yu Sheng. "Jinren Yu, we're going to fight again. I wonder what we're going to compete in this round?" Yu Sheng walked into the field unhurriedly, cupped his hands, and said, "Jinren Li, I admire your powerful magic and powerful magical weapons. I admit that I am inferior to you. Therefore, I want to compete with you in Yang spirit and see whose Yang spirit is more powerful. What do you think?" Li Yunyang laughed and said, "I dare not disobey." Everyone was overjoyed when they heard this. They all knew that in a fight, only a fight between Yang spirits consumed the most Jinqi. Often, after a fight, a cultivator's Jinqi would be almost exhausted, and there would not be much left. Li Yundong had agreed to fight with Yusheng for Yang spirits, so wouldn't he be exhausted to death? Even if he won, he would definitely suffer a great loss in the next round. At that time, wouldn't it be a great advantage for them to go up? For a moment, everyone was thinking about all kinds of tricks. Wang Jinyuan looked at the field in the cabin. At this time, the field had been messed up by Zhou Qin and Lu Yuqing. He smiled and said, "Wait for me to get someone to clean up the field, and then the two of you can fight again. How about that?" As soon as he finished speaking, a disciple of the Gazao sect suddenly ran in a hurry and whispered something in Wang Jinyuan's ear. When Wang Jinyuan heard this, his face suddenly changed and he shouted sternly, "How could such a thing happen? Who are they? If nothing unexpected happens, there should be another round in an hour and a half." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.